start shortly.
Order. Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Women and Equalities Select Committee and further evidence session into our inquiry in the escalation of violence against women and girls. This afternoon in our first panel we have Daren Mochrie, Chair of the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives, Kathryn Hinwood, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Programme Director at NHS England, and Kath Billing, the Equality and Diversity and Inclusion Lead at the National Fire Chiefs Council and Chief Fire Officer for Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service. As is usual, members of the committee will ask you questions in turn. They'll always indicate which witness they wish to answer, but if at any point any of you wish to come in and add something to an answer that somebody else has already given, then please do indicate and I will endeavour to bring you in. I'm going to start to Kathryn. There have been a significant number of reports of sexual harassment, sexual assault, abuse, particularly in mental health trusts, which have involved both patients and staff. What steps is the NHS leadership taking to tackle this, and why have so many people been failed?
First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to come and give evidence today, but also thank you to the committee for shining a light on what is one of society's most difficult issues, which is the perpetration of domestic abuse and sexual violence. I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the really brave survivors and victims who've shared their stories, both in the media and here before this committee, to also shine a light on these issues. Let me be clear that many of the stories that we have heard involve criminal conduct, and many of the stories are absolutely shocking. So in addition to thanking those survivors who brought their stories forward, I want to encourage those who feel able to report to the relevant NHS organisations, to report to the police if they feel able to, and to seek the support that they need. So every NHS trust and organisation already has in place policies that relate to safeguarding, conduct and discipline. So these are patient safety issues, safeguarding issues and employment issues. And so trusts should be following those robust measures that they already have in place. But if it is the case that any organisation and any survivor has reported the abuse or assault and they haven't had an adequate response, again, I would urge them to do everything that they can to take up complaints processes and whistleblowing processes. So I wanted to start out by really saying that. So there is clearly a lot of work to do, and there are a couple of things that we have focused in on over the last year or so to really help systems and survivors to have a voice to share their stories and to tackle these issues, which are frankly issues that are endemic within society. So we've had three specific focuses. The first one has been on infrastructure. So you heard evidence from our brilliant colleagues in Surviving in Scrubs and the Working Party on sexual misconduct in surgery in a separate session. And you heard a lot of their views about things that need to change for people to feel more confident in coming forward and reporting sexual abuse and sexual misconduct, particularly members of staff. So we have been working with them over the last year or so and worked with them to think about what kind of framework the healthcare system needs to tackle this. So the introduction of the Sexual Safety Charter is the first thing that we have done. So alongside now more than 250 organisations that have signed up to this charter, which needs to be implemented in July of this year, NHS England has taken a national leadership role in drafting model policies, working with colleagues with lived experience across the professions and systems that we're going to share with systems to adapt and adopt. We're working on training infrastructure that we will also share with systems. So we're trying to put the framework in place in relation to
You've been
stuff.
working on the framework for a year?
Well, one of the things that we heard really clearly from Surviving in Scrubs and from Tamsin and Chelsea was that we need to work with colleagues to understand some of the issues and work with them to produce. So the framework exists. The framework was set out in September of last year. So we're working on the implementation of it, and there's commitments in there in relation to revise policies, revise training. There's a data commitment, so that was one of the other areas that we've really focused in on. So we've ensured that in the NHS staff survey, there is a question relating to sexual harassment. There's also a question in the National Education and Training Survey, and there's a question in the NHS England staff survey. That data will be released in early March, so we will have for the first time in the biggest employer in Europe a real baseline of staff experience in relation to sexual harassment.
Should the biggest employer in Europe be treating this with more urgency?
There's other things that we have also put in place. We've asked every single ICB and trust to put in place domestic abuse and sexual violence leaders at an executive level to really focus in on what it is that needs to happen in terms of culture change and in every single organisation. The final thing that I would say we've done specifically in relation to mental health trust is we've worked with, again, clinicians, service users, people with lived experience, to create a new culture change improvement program that was launched this month that focuses in particular on leadership, oversight, and we have sexual safety embedded in there. That's just about to be rolled out, and we'll be able to share the standards with you shortly.
Yes, Kim.
Thank you, Kathryn. I just wanted to pick up on the issue that you raised, saying that all NHS trusts will have policies and procedures that they should be operating to. And then you said that if somebody had experienced sexual abuse in any way and at the first hurdle had not been listened to because of, the culture of organisation, would you expect somebody then to go back a second time and try to get some kind of support from the organisation when they're taken an awful lot of courage to go in the first time? So what do you think needs to happen to ensure that policies and procedures are implemented to the word that is identified in the policies?
Absolutely right. There's been way too much of a burden on survivors to have to do the work themselves, particularly in relation to gathering data. So the work
Surviving in Scrubs is a perfect example of
absolutely
the survivors collecting the data on the NHS's behalf.
Absolutely, which is why we've introduced now the questions into the NHS staff survey. One of the things that we're thinking about in relation to the commitment in the Sexual Safety Charter is what kind of reporting structures might be helpful to allow survivors to feel more confident in reporting. So we're learning from some of the work that universities have done, the Department of Energy and Net Zero, for example, on anonymous reporting infrastructures, because you can see that people feel much more comfortable reporting to and sharing their stories in an anonymous way to people like Surviving in Scrubs than they do coming forward and putting their name to complaints in so many instances. And unfortunately, this is something that you see not just in the NHS, but across society, across employers. We have to do more to ensure that victims have confidence in the system, that they're going to be seen, heard and believed.
I think it's Crime Stoppers provide an anonymous reporting / whistleblowing service. Is the NHS going to work with them to provide that so that you just can get the data?
So there's already some anonymous infrastructures that members of staff and the public can utilise. There's freedom to speak up guidelines. There's, of course, whistleblowing processes as well. Could you say more about the Crime Stoppers?
I'm very conscious that Crime Stoppers can provide an anonymous whistleblowing service, and I just wondered whether that would engender more confidence if it was outside the NHS. The evidence that we heard from particularly Surviving in Scrubs was that they didn't have any confidence in reporting. They didn't think there was any point in reporting. If they did report, there would be no action. So if there's a genuine interest in collecting the data, would it be better done outside of the NHS?
That's certainly one option. We're working with our expert advisory group that includes Surviving in Scrubs and Women in Surgery Working Party, thinking about what reporting infrastructures help to build confidence in the system. So I gave the example of the Department of Energy and Net Zero, for example. What they have built is an anonymous data reporting tool that allows people to report through a portal about their experience anonymously. That's certainly one option that we've been looking at. But there's other areas like the prison service, for example, I understand to have a particular helpline. There are lots of different ways that you can do things to build an infrastructure around anonymous reporting.
How long does it take to think?
So, we need to implement everything by July. We want to get this right. Will there
be an anonymous reporting system in place in July?
That's absolutely our intention. It's a key part of the Sexual Safety Charter. We need to work across systems as well. So NHS England can do something individually, so we're thinking about what we can do. But some of the requirements in terms of building a cross-system infrastructure, we need to work with trusts, we need to work with professions, we need to work with regulators and systems to ensure that there's something that's comprehensive, that works for everyone across the system. But yeah, absolutely, it's one of our key priorities.
I want to understand where the buck stops. So what power does NHS England have to say to individual trusts, you are going to do this. Here's the solution. This is the one system that's going to work across, whether it be the mental health trusts where we can see there's a massive problem, whether it's with, let's go with GP practices, whether it's with dentistry. What point does somebody carry the can for this and say, right, this is what is going to happen? How close are we to that decision?
So there's a number of elements to that. If, for example, a trust doesn't comply with its contractual requirements around meeting guidelines, meeting policies, meeting the law, the organisation that commissions that trust has contractual levers to intervene. So that might be an integrated care board, for example. Independent providers, it's slightly different. You also have provider licence conditions that can be levers around provider licence conditions. So the first step is for the commissioner to think about contractual and licence requirements. There's reporting in terms of CQC regulation, so the CQC and regulators have a role here as well. One of the great things...
So if I'm a nurse working in a mental health trust, should I not be able to point at that body there, rather than saying, oh, well, it might be the Integrated Care Board should have commissioned it, or the CQC should be doing this, or whoever? Should there not be one place where, as a nurse who feels unsafe in a mental health ward, can know this is where I can report and that is who is going to be responsible?
You're right. I think some of the reporting infrastructures are difficult for people to understand on the ground, and one of the commitments that we have made in relation to the implementation of the Charter is to try and really clarify that for people. It becomes problematic when regulators are involved as well in terms of reporting to professions, but it's really, really clear that if a nurse does not feel safe at work, then the route initially for them to report that is through that workplace's infrastructure.
Thank you. Daren, did you want to say something on that?
I think Kathryn picked up the points I was going to make around the regulators. So there's obviously the Care Quality Commission that Kathryn's mentioned. There's a Health Safety Investigation Branch as well. I think what you're asking for is that a difficult landscape then for staff to navigate, because there are so many different avenues.
Exactly what I'm asking.
I think in my experience, because not only am I the chair of AACE, I'm also the Chief Executive of the North West Ambulance Service, which is one of the big ambulance services up north, is that in my experience, some staff may approach the CQC direct, some staff may go through freedom to speak up, some staff may go through a line manager. So I think having some different avenues is probably helpful in some cases as well, if I'm being honest.
Okay. Jackie, did you want to ask a question on that?
Yeah, I just want to come back to you referred to criminal law, and clearly where someone's been a victim of sexual violence, they have to, they have to be the ones comfortable enough to actually pursue it criminally. But nevertheless, the support structures which are around them have a big influence on that. And I've been made aware of cases where patients have been assaulted, been victims of serious sexual assault in hospitals. And, ultimately, if you're a patient in hospital, you're in a very vulnerable position. You're not in a position to actually call the police if you're subject to sustained, sexual violence attacks. The first person you're going to report that to is to additional practitioners who are looking after you. And I've had reports from Rape Crisis that all too often these things are just handled by HR within the NHS, rather than for the NHS to properly grip that this is a criminal matter and a crime has been committed while someone is in the care of that institution. So could you just say a little bit more about that, and in terms of where you think the NHS's responsibility should start and end with regards to supporting a criminal investigation in those circumstances?
I think it's really complex in terms of the NHS's role, other than the starting point of if there is a criminal offence that has been committed. Policies ought to be clear at the moment about the role of the police and bringing police in to investigate. Certainly, if a patient wants that to happen, there are instances when they may not. The policies that we're developing at the moment around sexual misconduct in particular set out very clearly the role of the police and the role of criminal justice investigations. So that's in a sexual misconduct context. Safeguarding policies cover this as well, and they ought to be followed.
Ought to be or are? Can you sit here and say that you're confident that those policies are clear and are followed?
I'm confident that they're clear, but you've certainly heard evidence that they're not being followed in certain circumstances. So that's...
So basically, in order for us to have confidence that these matters are being handled effectively by the NHS, we need to have confidence in the procedures and what that should be followed. And on the evidence you've just given the chair, I'm not sure that we can be, because it all seems a bit wishy-washy and voluntary. So I'd just like to relate this to an experience we've had here in Parliament, because you're absolutely right when it comes to sexual violence offences. People are very reticent to actually report them to criminal justice because the process is extremely uncomfortable to follow through, and the risks of conviction are so high. There's a judgment call, and somebody who's a patient, for example, who's in a very vulnerable position is going to be even more difficult judgment. So we had the same thing here in Parliament, recognising that we had issues with sexual offences and the power imbalance that might be at play by complainants versus offenders, and the chances of getting a successful prosecution. So we established our own completely separate, completely independent way of making investigations. And being frank, the burden of proof is a lot less. So there is an element of accountability, quite public accountability for people's actions, which is prompter and probably more public than a criminal investigation. I mean, if we are going to have integrity, and recognising that we are talking about a public service which is very male-dominated, and which deals with very vulnerable people, is there not a case for something very independent and very clear that complainants can go to?
Absolutely, and we're looking at that at the moment in the context of the implementation of the Charter with, again, professions and colleagues across the system. You're right. We're trying to learn from models that exist in other areas. We've been working really closely with our ambulance service colleagues in understanding some of the successes that they've had in implementing their sexual safety charter. London Ambulance Service in particular has done some really good work there. I just wanted to go back to your point, though, earlier around support for victims. And one of the really, really critical things that we need to ensure that we are embedding is, so Rape Crisis do a fantastic job, the embedding of independent sexual violence advisors and independent domestic violence advisors into healthcare settings and in sexual assault referral centres is really, really important, so that you're right, someone who has experienced sexual abuse, sexual violence, has access immediately to independent support, so that they aren't bearing the burden themselves. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yes, my biggest concern are those people who are actually experiencing healthcare or vulnerable, which is why, you know, the evidence about mental health trusts is actually really instructive. I mean, clearly, we're talking about a large number of institutions across the country that are delivering healthcare, and they're all very different. Do you have a handle on perhaps any examples of people, of organisations that are doing this really well or really badly?
So one of the things that NHS England is doing is pulling together areas that are working on this. So we have a domestic abuse and sexual violence lead now in every integrated care board and most trusts across the country. So we've been bringing them together to learn in terms of things that have worked and things that haven't worked on sexual safety policies, implementation, training. And London Ambulance Service colleagues, for example, have come and have presented to us recently on some of the lessons that they have been learning on sexual safety. I don't know, Daren, if you wanted to talk particularly about their work.
I think we'll come to Daren and some questions on their work in due course.
Sure.
Thank you. Kath, can I turn to you? Look, it's the same question. We've seen some horrific reports about where it has gone horribly wrong in the fire service. I could point at South Wales, I could talk about Tyne and Wear, or I could focus a little bit closer to home for me and ask about Wilts and Dorset Fire Service. We know from media reports, and indeed the report that was done into Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service, cultural misogyny, ingrained, endemic in the service. But across the other ones, who should be responsible? Who should ultimately be answerable when there is a report that finds that your fire service is culturally misogynistic and sexist? Should it be the chief fire officer? Should it be the chair of the fire authority? Where should responsibility sit?
As chief officer of Cornwall Fire and Rescue Service, I would say, and the responsibility and accountability ultimately lies with me, absolutely supported by my fire authority, but it lies with me, and I've been very clear as a chief of my own service that I recognise each and every single one of those reports that we've seen, the disgusting behaviour that that's been reported, and as my colleague said, absolutely courageously. And I certainly wouldn't sit here and provide anybody with any assurance that that behaviour hasn't happened, certainly in my service. And what you have got is a collective unity across chief fire officers to say we absolutely fully accept each and every one of those reports and accept that that could be the position within our own services. And that really is what's driving us to kind of enforce that change.
And how do you drive? I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm picking on you, but it's a great example. You are a chief fire officer, so how do you drive change so that women coming into work in Devon and Cornwall Fire Service, that you can sit there and know that they will be safe, that they will be treated with respect and on an equal basis with their colleagues?
Just for the record, we haven't taken over Devon yet, although...
Oh, sorry.
I've
just given you Devon.
I was going to say, well, thank you. So for me, it's about, number one, as I have set out quite clearly, is if we do find inappropriate behaviour, we will deal with it in the most appropriate way. And I have terminated the employment of firefighters that haven't met the standards that we expect. In relation to kind of conduct and behaviour. But equally, what I would say is that we do have to remember that the majority of firefighters and people that work in fire and rescue services are really good people, and we have to accept, have we actually given them the opportunity to learn and understand and to challenge appropriately? And that is what we're now developing as National Fire Chiefs Council, are mechanisms by which we can develop our staff. So there are leadership programmes that begin to help and assure us that that our people are being trained in the right way to challenge inappropriate behaviour. And it's not just a challenge, it's then about how do we ensure that people are confident that, as my colleague said, that investigations are undertaken in the right way. So there's a lot of work that we are doing across the fire sector, individually, but also as part of the National Fire Chiefs Council, to develop training, but also develop challenging behaviour toolkits, and we're using best practice from other organisations. We're not kind of making this up ourselves. And also a culture dashboard methodology, so that we can see where we are either making a difference positively, or where there are areas that we need to target and address with further measures. Can I come back to the reporting lines though as well?
Yep, absolutely.
So in relation to reporting lines, whilst the National Fire Chiefs Council can't mandate independent reporting, as I said, there is a huge commitment from chief officers, and we made that commitment last year at one of our March meeting. In September we did a survey around independent reporting lines, and there were 73% responses from our fire and rescue services, that's 36, that said they had already put independent reporting lines in place. And there were 13, that's 27%, that said that they are working on the independent reporting lines, because we do recognise that independence is something that at the moment we need, because we don't have the culture there where people feel comfortable to necessarily report and be assured that those investigations will be conducted in the appropriate way.
What role does the inspectorate have?
The inspectorate plays a crucial role. They've also got their own independent reporting line, which I absolutely know firsthand works. So people can independently report in, and they will take that into the fire authority, and then they will require an indication of action that's been undertaken and updates on that. So the inspectorate plays an incredible role. They've just undertaken a thematic review of misconduct within fire and rescue services following the Spotlight report last year, which they produced. And they also had their ongoing inspections. They're on round 3 at the moment. And one of those pillars that they look at is around people, values, culture.
Do you have any sense of what proportion of an inspection that would make up for? And I'm particularly thinking about Wilton Dorset, where the inspectorate rated it as good just weeks before ITV's expose, which revealed firefighters asking female firefighters for sexual favours at the scene of a fire, dead women being photographed by firefighters, and yet the inspectorate thought that was a good service.
And that's why, we're clear that this isn't just a one answer fits all. It has to be done kind of collaboratively. The inspectorate are very clear that they come in and make their judgments based on the conversations they have with people. It is a snapshot. But I certainly can say that, from my perspective, they certainly, have done a rigorous inspection and highlighted the areas of concern within my service.
If it's a snapshot, it doesn't look like it was a very good camera in Wiltshire, does it?
I certainly wouldn't want to kind of comment on their inspection. However, what I would say is it's His Majesty's Inspectorate are one element of assurance. I'll come back to my original statement, which is the chief officer and indeed the fire authority are the people that should be wholly accountable. What we're trying to do now through the National Fire Chiefs Council is support chief officers to have the data, to have the information that will allow them to understand and provide that level of assurance around culture within their fire services.
Is there any problem with fire authorities which, from a casual glance, might look a little bit like an old boys' club?
I would suggest not, provided again you've got the right. It's the right training. I kind of look at my scrutiny in my cabinet, but what I do know is that they've undertaken kind of training. They absolutely know my expectations of culture and behaviour. They're very aware of the national picture of culture and behaviour in fire and rescue services. And, you know, they've taken the time to ensure that they're asking me the right questions, that I can provide them with the level of assurance that I would need to. And I'm sure that's being undertaken across different governance models within fire and rescue services.
I could just observe, I can find examples where men outnumber women on fire authorities by 2 to 1, which seems to be slightly heavily male biased. So I wanted to ask just a final question about white ribbon locations, safe havens for women fleeing domestic abuse, immediate danger. How many white ribbon accredited stations have serving staff who've been accused of sexual assault or harassment?
I don't have that information, but if it's certainly available, I can provide that back to the committee if that's...
I think that would be useful. And also I'd like to know if a station is accredited as a white ribbon station, it's a place of safety for women, what specific steps are taken to make sure there are no officers serving who have any record of sexual assault or harassment? I'd like to know, you know, that if these are places of safety for women, what additional measures go in to scrutinise and to check that there is enough rigour there.
The CEO of White Ribbon, Anthea Sully, she chairs the independent panel which has been set up by the National Fire Chiefs Council. So we can,
You ask her. That would be really helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sure that is certainly a question that she's asking.
Daren, sorry, your turn. Look, I think we've heard the NHS in particular saying that the ambulance service can provide a model that they would seek to follow. What particular learnings have there been following some, again, horrendous reports of sexual harassment and abuse in the ambulance service?
Yeah, so through the Association of Ambulance Chief Executive, we recognised a few years ago that there were too many cases being highlighted that were just unacceptable in the workplace. And through the association, we appointed a programme lead for violence and aggression. We appointed a programme lead for behaviours, sexual safety, misogyny across the ambulance sector. So Bron and Adam have been taking forward a lot of work in this space, working closely with NHS England, working closely with the Chief Allied Health Professions Officer as well. And we've produced a number of documents really around best practice and guidance. So we hope that ambulance trusts across not just England but the UK take on board those best practice documents and then adopt them within their organisations. But we're not going to stop at that. We're now going to work with colleagues across the sector, colleagues across National Police, Fire Chiefs Council, NHS England and others to continue to make sure that we're making progress in some of the areas that we're describing today at the committee. One case is far too many as far as we're concerned, and whether that's staff within the organisation on staff or whether that's patients on staff or staff on patients, because it works many different ways, sadly, doesn't it nowadays, and that some of our call handlers will say that they are sexually abused down the phone on many occasions when they take 999 calls, for example. So how do we have an approach that gives them the support that they need? How do we give them the opportunity to be able to speak up as and when they need to be able to speak up? And how do we give them confidence that when people do speak up, that we're actually going to do something about it? So we've been looking at lots of different things, and I'll not repeat what others have said, but it's about me as the Chief Executive or the Chair of AACE setting the tone around values, behaviours, ensuring that we've got the right systems and processes, governance and assurance in place. How do we make sure that leaders and staff are trained in some of these difficult things that they need to deal with? And how do we keep that momentum going? And Bron and Adam, as I say, have been doing a lot of work supporting us in that space. We worked very closely recently with NHS England on the culture review into the ambulance sector, which was only just published last week. There are 6 recommendations in that. One of the recommendations in that, and I've been in the job now 33 years in ambulance, 35 in the NHS, is that I think for too many years now we have focused on operational response time and demand challenges and perhaps not focused on some of the other things that we need to be focusing on, whether that's culture, equality and diversity, or whatever the case may be. So we're now pleased to see that that's recognised within some of the 6 recommendations within this report, so we can closely work with NHS England to get that balance right going forward.
And what specific data are you collecting?
So we look at lots of different bits of data. So we use the NHS staff survey as one of the biggest pieces of data. So we look at that. We look at other data, whether that's pulse surveys. That's a bit similar to the staff survey. We look at internationally. We look at other organisations. So we know that Ambulance Victoria in Melbourne had similar challenges to some of the experiences we see here in the UK. We've obviously looked at police and fire reports more recently. And we had our ambulance leadership conference last year, where we had 500 staff and leaders at that conference. And one of the sessions, or the morning session, was focused on nothing but the Baroness Casey report, our Freedom to Speak Up NHS Guardians report, and Nazif Asfar as well, who did the report into the London Fire Brigade as well. So he came and spoke to us about what more we could do within the sector. So we look at lots of different data and then try and triangulate it to make sure we're focusing in on the right things.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you so much. My questions are a bit more about culture behind these issues. It's a question for each of you in the first instance. Have your services been putting the safety of members of the public at risk by not tackling issues of sexual assault and harassment? For example, is someone who's just been sexually assaulted by a colleague going to be in the best mental state to carry out their very important job effectively? If I can start with you, Kathryn.
I think that's a really great point, and one of the reasons that the programme that I lead has focused first on sexual safety of our staff and staff experiencing domestic abuse as well, because alongside the Sexual Safety Charter and the model policies that we're putting out in terms of sexual misconduct, we're also doing the same for staff who experience domestic abuse. So we're really clear that we've got to make sure that, I guess sometimes the expression is we've got our own house in order in terms of supporting staff, ensuring that we are dealing effectively with any perpetrators within the system, so that then any risks to patient safety that might exist there can be mitigated against. You're absolutely right.
And Daren.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question? I missed the first part when you were just...
Yeah, it's about the safety of members of the public if those who are working in the organisation have been, subject to sexual harassment and it's not been tackled, and what impact it has on the well-being of staff trying to do their job. And, is that, something that you're taking seriously and tackling?
Yeah, so I think what you're asking about when ambulance staff perhaps deal with domestic abuse and really difficult cases out in the community. Somebody touched upon it earlier on around, we do a lot now in terms of safeguarding training for our staff. So staff are now much more well trained than I was. I'll be back in the early 90s when I was a young paramedic, and being able to recognise issues and know how to report safeguarding referrals. And I think now we've got much more support within the ambulance sector than we've ever had around how we support members of staff when they do come across difficult scenes or difficult scenarios or difficult cases, whether that be children, whether that's adults or whatever it might be. Have we got it right? Probably not. There'll be cases where it maybe doesn't happen as well as it could or should. But again, I'm hoping that through all the work that I described earlier on, that we're identifying where cases perhaps haven't come through the right safeguarding channels, or we've not put the right support in place for staff, and that we learn from that, and then we do get it right the next time for those individual members of staff.
Thank you. And Kathryn.
Thank you. The current reports that we've seen that have come out from Fire and Rescue Services, it's been clear in those reports that, whilst there may be misogyny, racism, transphobia, sexism, and ableism, racism, all of the protected characteristics kind of noted and discriminated against. What it has been found is that doesn't transfer into delivery of service to the public, and there is no evidence of discrimination. But to your point around how is it for a person that has been potentially sexually harassed and then they have to join that crew to do their work. And making sure that that's looked after. I think what that does is it probably just extends to the courage that they've demonstrated throughout their experiences. The fact that they have continued to kind of do their role. Again, like I said, I think that extends to their courage. And as colleagues have said, this is about moving forwards and ensuring that we don't have people in those positions, but indeed, unfortunately, if they are, that they have a route that they can, number one, speak out, but number two, we can wrap the protection that they need around them and support their well-being.
What protection would you wrap around them?
It would be different in individual services, but if I can speak on behalf of the London Fire Brigade, I sit on their independent panel. That is something that they've kind of dedicated as part of their investigation piece, that they have dedicated welfare support. Number one, in the form of kind of an officer, but number two, that more specialist support that will be there for them in relation to kind of counselling.
Right, thank you.
That does extend into other services as well.
And a question to each of you: where have you found the worst pockets of behaviour in your organisation, and what role do you feel social media has played in validating misogynistic, sexist and sometimes violent behaviours? So where are you trying to identify it and really root it out?
I think from my own personal experience, but also from the reports, there is no one particular area. I think it is fair to say, and it's probably been said before, that each and every one of our services is a representative society. You know, we try to reflect our communities. So it's not going to be any one particular group of people or area of the service where, you know, we can say, right, well, it's that group of people for this reason, because of that reflection of society. I would absolutely.
It's widespread then.
I think it's kind of throughout throughout organisations. Do I think social media perpetuates it? I do. I think it. As I was a keen user of social media kind of a while ago, so I think it has some real positives. But again, it's just the trolling, it's the perpetuation of kind of hopefully you don't mind, but I've had it. It's often never because I'm incompetent. It's got to be because I'm a woman. It's always about what I wear rather than what I do. So for me, if that's not perpetuation of misogyny, I don't mind being called incompetent as a chief fire officer, but can I have it on the same equitable levels as my male colleagues? So again, I do apologise for bringing my personal experience into it, but I see that across other areas. So yes, I do believe that social media perpetuates misogyny and all of the other areas of discrimination in a quite detrimental way. Thank you.
And Kathryn, what about the sectors in your organisation? Are there particular pockets of behaviour in particular areas that you've highlighted, and again about social media, does that perpetuate?
Well, again, I would go back to the excellent work that Surviving in Scrubs have done and the Working Party on Sexual Misconduct in Surgery. Clearly, they have highlighted areas where there are really alarming reports and rates of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, but also Nicola Ranger gave evidence to you on the same day and also talked about the experience of nurses. So we've got a lot of data that it cuts across the sector as it cuts across society. But I would also go back to the really the expertise of people like Joe Todd, who gave evidence to you on behalf of Respect, who talked about workplaces or situations where there's a hierarchy, where there's a male-dominated area, where there's vulnerability, there's trusted professions, positions of power, and so you will find that, of course, in any workplace that has those types of characteristics. So I think if you look for those characteristics across the NHS and look at the work that colleagues have done, you will see where it is taking place.
Where there's particular hierarchical structures in place, it's more difficult perhaps to report, and then if it's particularly male-dominated, that type of perhaps culture in terms of misogyny coming more to the fore.
Yeah, certainly that's the evidence that I know you have had put before you, which I would absolutely agree with.
What about the social media then aspect?
So I don't have any evidence or expertise in that, and again, and I would rely on the work that colleagues have done in relation to that.
Is that something that's kind of screened, or there's a policy for in terms of appropriate social media for staff?
I would imagine, I have to come back to you, but I would imagine that most employers and organisations do have that kind of policy. We certainly have that kind of thing in NHS England. I don't know if it's replicated in the same way in every organisation, but there absolutely must be. And then again, if you move into something that constitutes sexual harassment under the Equality Act, or if you move into something that constitutes a criminal act, then of course it's covered by our conduct and disciplinary policies as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, we can't say it's in one particular area or another, because I think when you do that, that's when you become perhaps complacent, or you don't then identify it in a particular area. So whether that's urban versus rural, busy service versus quiet service, or whether that's in the 999 service versus the NHS 111 service that a lot of the ambulance services run. So I think it's just keeping your eyes open to, it could take place anywhere. And in any part of our business. In terms of social media, yes, all services will have social media policies. These have to be continually updated as social media and other things evolve, as we all know. It doesn't help social media, does it? We've heard some of that evidence there just now, and I was particularly disturbed with the evidence or the attack on one of the senior police officers over the weekend that we saw, which was just absolutely horrific. It really was, and I was pleased to see Lucy Dorsey, the Chief Constable of BTP, and others speak out about that publicly on social media. I just wanted to add another quick couple of things. In the North West Ambulance Service, for an example, we've actually now got more females than males, so 55% females versus 45% males. So that has changed in the time that I've been in the ambulance sector. And just going back to the earlier point around what more can we do, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to work with the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Procurator Fiscal, whoever it might be, to make sure that if there are things going on, that we get full support from them and how we then tackle it. We've got body-worn cameras now on trial across most of our organisations too. So I just wanted to throw some of these additional bits of information in just in the time that we've got available. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you as well, because in written evidence you had said that your work in the area had found that sexual harassment can escalate to more serious offences, and predominantly it's predominantly towards colleague perpetrated, and would that disproportionately affect female staff? And what sort of escalation of offences have you seen?
I think it's the kind of, so the ambulance sector, we kind of sit in two camps, don't we? We're very much NHS, but we've got that emergency service role and command and control when it's required, and rank markings or tabars or whatever we've got. And I think there is still a lot of banter that takes place within mess rooms, within ambulance vehicles, that might have been, probably wasn't acceptable 30 years ago, but happened 30 years ago. But now it's just completely not acceptable. And we're doing a lot of work as well with the sector and with organisations around how we stamp out that banter, and that is not acceptable to do or say the things that you might have done 30 years ago when you first joined the organisation. And that is all about changing the culture, leadership and behaviour.
Is it that you feel that the banter is part of the context that then perpetuates the escalation?
I've not got any evidence that low-level banter then leads on to something much more serious. But we know, in New York years ago, when minor vandalism and antisocial behaviour and things weren't tackled, that then led on to more serious crime being committed. And I'm sure it's no different that if people think they can get away with doing or saying certain things in a mess room or in the back of the ambulance, then do they then take an inch or take a mile and then think they can get away with more, perhaps, with either staff or patients? So it's about how you get on top of that and stamp that out.
Well, the banter might be part of this, but are there any other sort of warning signs, and what are you doing to sort of intercept that behaviour at an early stage then, so it doesn't escalate?
well, as I keep saying to my executive team, it's about identifying the red flags. 9 times out of 10, a lot of us could probably tell you who those in the mess room or wherever they are, or the regular patients that we have, are the ones that have got those red flags. And I would much rather take appropriate action against those individuals and run the risk of going to an employment tribunal than, God forbid, ending up in here and or in the front pages of the Daily Mail or whatever, because it has gone horribly wrong and a patient or a member of the staff has came to real serious harm because we didn't identify and do anything about those red flags, because we thought our hands might be tied or we were too concerned about public reputation.
Acting on the red flags.
Acting on the red flags and taking decisive and appropriate action in line with the policies and procedures, yes.
And Kathryn, what patterns of escalating behaviours have your service seen in the NHS?
I think Chelsea gave some evidence that they had gathered through the Surviving in Scrubs work about some of the escalations that they've had reported to them. But I wanted to pick up on the banter point that Daren had made, because I think that is absolutely critical in terms of stopping behaviours and ensuring that people understand that what could be dismissed as banter can constitute sexual harassment in the definitions in the Equality Act. So we've made really sure, for example, that in our staff survey questions we set out proper definitions of what can constitute sexual harassment, so that staff really understand this is what it is, that you may have experienced that, but that can constitute sexual harassment. We're doing the same in our policies as well.
And staff calling it banter minimises it in a way.
Yeah, we wouldn't use the term banter. Yeah. We didn't use the term banter. I think that's so we use jokes, inappropriate wording, things like that. But you're right. The concept of banter itself, I think, is highly problematic. And if you can focus on ensuring that some of what is seen as low-level behaviours but are in fact unlawful behaviours and constitute sexual harassment are actioned, that is where you can start to shift cultures and shift behaviours.
Thank you, and Kathryn.
Something that's referenced quite nicely, I think, in the ambulance review is around the balance of operational performance with people performance at all levels. And I think if I kind of link that into the National Fire Chiefs Council work that we're doing, it does come back to the kind of the laying down of expectations. So through kind of your zero tolerance statements, which the NFCC has published, setting out at a high level, and like you said, I think the term banter actually minimises the derogatory language and behaviour that's used under that term. But then it's for me around, as I spoke about earlier on, the training and the development to ensure that managers are able to address it. But you know what? It's also around each and every one of us as individuals, because you don't have to be a manager to understand what's right and wrong. And you certainly don't have to be a manager to challenge inappropriate behaviour, which then links into the toolkit that we're producing. And I think something we've all talked about consistently is around data. And one thing we're doing at the National Fire Chiefs Council, we're going to be working with the local government association and also the Home Office, because we collect a lot of data, but what we want to do is to make sure that we're consistent in that data collection and that we're able to, as we said, not only at a local level but a national level, start to identify those flags. Because we're talking about culture and values and behaviours right here, right now. But I know when I leave the service, I want it to be talked about more positively, but I want it to continue to be addressed. I want it to continue to be looked at. I don't want this to fall off the radar in 10 years' time. This needs to be equally as important as our operational performance. And I think through that, the metrics and the monitoring, we can certainly drive to ensure that it is seen and maintained in that appropriate light.
Thank you so much.
Daren, can I just take you back to your red flags and your willingness as a Chief Executive of an ambulance service to take disciplinary action against individuals who you think have shown behaviour that crosses a line that does provoke that red flag, and you've taken the risk of going to tribunal. Do you keep any stats on how many of those cases you're successful in?
No, I don't. Well, we probably do behind the scenes, but I would need to gather it, to be honest. And again, thinking my own personal experience, in NWAS, North West Ambulance Service, no, I would need to probably go away and get that information for you, to be honest. We will have information now, I think, won't we, that breaks down the kind of disciplinary case mix. But what happens at tribunal level and whether it's overturned or indeed whether there's a prosecution on either a member of staff and or a member of the public or a patient, I'm not entirely sure whether we've got that or not.
Gosh, I think data collection in this space is quite inconsistent and needs a lot of work. That's something that we would recognise between the three of us.
I can ask a question for you.
Yeah, you would recognise, but actually doing anything about?
We've undertaken a review of what data is collected on a national basis and on local basis in relation to sexual misconduct and domestic abuse, both in terms of patients and staff. And we're working through what it is that we could do to improve that. It's large-scale infrastructure improvements. I was also really struck by, again, Joe's evidence about the lack of data around perpetrators more on a national scale. And as we have been talking, it has made me think about how nationally we just don't have a picture of these kinds of things, and some of the cross-system pictures that we could get if we had something that was worked on together could be incredibly rich and helpful.
Which is certainly something that we heard from those working in the domestic abuse sector, is that actually cross-system data is what's required. Daren, a second question for you around culture. So look, I think you've been very clear in your ambulance service. You've had a zero tolerance approach. You've been prepared to dismiss what I would refer to as the banter defence as the nonsense that it is. Does every chief executive of every ambulance service in the country share that view?
I would say they do now, if I'm being honest. I think you have done enough work now across the sector with not just the chief executives but the chairs and the various different boards of each of the ambulance services. So I think they do. Whether that then plays out day in, day out across their organisations, I couldn't comment on that. But what I can give you assurance on is that as an association of ambulance chief executives, we're not going to just say, well, that's it done now and move on to the next thing. We are going to continue to invest in this role that we've got, and we are going to continue to make sure, and we've got a few over the next 12 months, development sessions for chief execs and chairs, and we will have Brawn back giving information about what we've spoken about today and some of the data that we've described to make sure that everybody gets it and understands that it is everybody's business.
Thank you.
Carolyn. Thank you, Chair. Do you know, I listening to you all talking, and I was thinking, this is not a new problem. This is something that has always been around. But there will still be people working in every single organisation who will be here in today's session and be thinking, stuff and nonsense. Why are we worrying about that? There's no harm in it. We didn't mean it. And I worry about in what roles those people who are still in the organisation, because this is, instead of sort of sharing best practice, it's inheriting bad behaviour, isn't it? So we got from one to another. We've learnt the skills of how to be abusive. We've learnt the skills of how to be misogynistic and how to sexualise women in the workplace, etc. How many of the cases that you're all aware of been perpetrated by a senior member of staff, and it's the victim whose career has ended and not the perpetrator? I'll start with you, Kathryn.
In relation to national positions, I wouldn't be able to kind of directly respond to that. Within my own service, the most recent kind of accounts that have come out are more along the lines of banter, as it is called, that has kind of escalated to kind of that inappropriate level, and that's where your kind of closer-knit teams that have been working have maybe kind of just joined in and been part of it as it's kind of escalated to the level of what we would absolutely deem to be unacceptable.
Again, I'm going to return to the workers surviving in scrubs and the evidence that you heard from them and Tamsin from the Working Party on Sexual Misconduct in Surgery, and they certainly have powerfully in their work heard stories of people who felt and reported that had been the case. Which is, I mean, what you've described is why this culture change work is so absolutely critical, and so getting in every organisation, every integrated care board, every trust, senior lead talking about the importance of domestic abuse and sexual violence work, talking about the sexual safety charter. It's absolutely critical to be able to change the conversations that are being had at a senior level.
I don't have the information around the kind of seniority of any of the cases or anything like that. We could try and get that, I suppose, for committee. But just on the point around resistance, I think that was the word you actually used, wasn't it? And when I met with Bron, our lead, last week and asked her about some key messages and what she would like me to get across to committee today, is resistance was one of the things that she is still worried about, actually, in that not everybody necessarily gets it. And perhaps still thinks it's acceptable to say or do whatever they've done for the last 30 years, and she thinks that is a barrier to some of the cultural change within the sector. So I think she's produced some resistance guidance for managers and staff about what it actually means and how you overcome some of those resistance challenges, I suppose. So that's a good point, because that was raised by Bron earlier on.
Yeah, I mean, if I can come back to you, Kathryn, and say you would have seen the investigation that Paul Brand did for ITN or ITV. 2 fire services in Wales, which I'm extremely embarrassed by. What I've just talked about was through it completely. It's not a minor problem, it's a major problem. So, and I think it's probably worse in the fire service than anywhere else from the research that I've done. How would you combat that?
I think one thing that we're probably all talking about here is it's absolutely systemic. We are battling against an institution, and the conversations that I regularly have with colleagues in the police as well is that I've been in the service 25 years, and things, in fairness, have moved on. The conversations and the banter has significantly changed, but it's still not to the level which and we're certainly seeing cases where it certainly hasn't moved on in some cases. So how do we, and this is about absolutely going down to the real basics, because we've built an institution on probably white, heterosexual, male-dominated systems, processes, uniform, equipment. Every single thing is built around that one particular viewpoint. And what we need to do is to break pretty much all of that down. And some of the work that the NFCC are now doing is around looking at our policies, process, and having broader conversations about how do we start to bring the victim's voice into the development of recruitment, development of policies, the development of leadership programs, because until we can start to view things from victims but also other people's perspectives, we will probably continue. It's that thing, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So how can we now bring in different viewpoints? And that comes back to that. We want a more diverse workforce, but what we do need to do is make sure we're bringing them into an organisation where they will absolutely be valued and their voices will be heard.
You're not going to get a more diverse workforce when you're asking people to join a service which has now got a really bad history of bad behaviour towards women. You mentioned something earlier on about new people coming in and reporting bad behaviour that they see. How confident and comfortable are new starters or relatively new officers in reporting to potentially resistant line managers bad behaviour? Are they fearful that their careers are going to be on the line?
That's why the independent reporting is so important, because what I think each and every one of us has said is we're not going to sit here and provide you with the assurance that every single fire and rescue service has got the culture where people feel confident to report and confident that reporting will be investigated in the right way. So that's why right here, right now, the independent reporting, especially for fire services, is important, because, like we said, this isn't just a do one thing, fix everything. It has to be done whilst we're fixing the cultural problem and the investigation problem. And over here, we need to ensure that people have those independent lines of reporting so that they can have that confidence that their voices will be heard and the action will be taken.
Presumably you're working with the FBU as well?
Yes.
Okay. in hospitals, it's a different dynamic again, I know, but characteristically, most consultants are male, most nurses are female. What's the dynamic there? What's the, how often is it a senior doctor who is seen to be causing grief to a young nurse who is relatively new, inexperienced, and doesn't want to rock the boat, quite frankly?
Again, I don't have that data myself. One of the things that, again, I'll share the work that colleagues have done in this space. But one of the things that we will have for the first time in March is data from the National Education Training Survey that talks about learners' experience of sexual harassment, and I think that will be really rich, helpful data in understanding the issues a lot better.
And you, Daren, is it, have you got more women because they see that you're doing more?
Well, funny, we had that conversation recently actually around how we've now got that 55-45 split in North West Ambulance Service. What we're also seeing, in addition to more women now in the ambulance service and in the sector, is a younger workforce as well. So a lot of now staff, I think a high proportion are under 25 and female within the workplace. So is that a good thing? Are we able to attract that workforce in because we are getting better at this, we're getting better at, I don't know, different kind of policies and procedures around flexible working and things like that? I don't know. But again, I wouldn't be sitting here and be complacent around, to leave you with the impression that we don't think there is still a challenge within the sector. We need to keep at it and keep on it. And I suppose it's even more important now, isn't it, that if we have got more women and younger people within our organisations, that we keep up with the times and we keep up with making sure that we are a good and attractive employer for the future.
All three of you, do you feel that your respective organisations have at any time put the reputation of the service ahead of the interests of the victims? I don't care who goes first.
Again, I think that over the years that probably will have happened, won't it? I think I'm sure if you looked at all the research and all the evidence, there will be examples where leaders, boards, whoever, authorities have put their reputation first before victims, or whether that's staff or members of the public.
But what I would say is, that I've seen that shift, I've seen that change, and I, again, apologies again, but speaking on behalf of myself, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's probably happened previously, but right here, right now, we've seen that change in commitment to do what's right, and if that means that and to be quite honest, I know that when we terminated the employment of firefighters in Cornwall, it damaged my reputation, it damaged the reputation of the organisation until one of our local kind of press companies released some of the information. I was called woke and weak, but did I care? Absolutely not, because I could look at myself in the mirror when I went home and gone, I've done the right thing. And I think that's what you've got now, is a swathe of managers and leaders of our organisations that are going, no, enough is enough.
But is it a case of this change has all happened because it's been found out, not because it needed to happen anyway, but suddenly TV programmes and documentaries and stories that will appear in the paper saying this is really bad behaviour, and things now are being talked about, and things like, look at the dreadful situation with the Met Police. Are we seeing a sea change? It's a bit like not being sorry for being...
You're sorry because you're being...
It's not being sorry for the crime, but just being sorry for being caught, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
I think the answer to that, again, from my perspective, is no, because... But what you have done, and what I would definitely say is please keep the scrutiny going, because, this, from my perspective, is shining the light on something that we have wanted the light to be shone on for years, and it is...
What stopped the light from shining? What was stopping other people from within the service speaking out? Why wait until it becomes a front page of the Daily Mail? No, surely somebody should have been speaking out before now.
I think action's been taken before, but you haven't heard about it because it's not been in the news. So it's not until you've had those national reports that yourselves have gone, gosh, what's this all about? But if you go back, again, 2019, 2020, before, 3-4 years before these reports, firefighters were being, they were being terminated because of their conduct and behaviour.
Well, I think it's a societal shift as well, where some of these conversations just weren't being had within society as a whole, but within infrastructures. Certainly, from my perspective, our Chief Executive, Amanda Pritchard, appointed me, set this programme up, is really personally committed to this agenda. I came in without a permanent programme. The programme has been made permanent. We've appointed a national clinical director. Of course, scrutiny drives action to an extent, but the commitment is absolutely real from me and so many other leaders.
Daren?
Yeah. Without repeating what's already been said, I think we have dealt with these things over the years. I think it's a case of we now hear more about it, don't we? Whether it's through social media, whether it's through the mainstream media, whatever the case may be. There is a societal issue out there. We know that. I'm sure there'll be another committee looking at things like pornography with children and things like that, which is probably contributing to some of the way some people think, and so on and so forth. So I think for us, it's about how do we keep on that front foot. The ambulance sector has had its challenges, as we know, but what we've done is we've tried to get much more on the front foot, and we've not just done it because we want, because we felt we needed to do it. We've just thought that it's the right thing to do. It's unacceptable behaviour, and let's get on the front foot and let's work with colleagues, whether it's NHS England or others.
I still think being on the front foot would have been going public with it and not waiting for the media to catch you out and then to have to go public with it. But yeah. So can I just ask you one last question, all of you? Yeah. Are you aware of any NDAs that your organisation may have with victims? Daren, do you want to go first?
To be honest, no. In the 35 years I've been in the NHS ambulance, I'm not aware of any. NHS England really tightened up NDAs and compromise agreements, which I think is what they were called beforehand, and now it's something that is not the done thing, really. There might be older ones out there, but I'm not aware of them, certainly in recent times.
Kathryn with the kitty.
That takes me back to university. No, I mean, it's against AACEE guidance, it's against NHS employers guidance, it's against Cabinet Office guidance since 2019. So NHS organisations should absolutely not, and I'm not aware of any NDAs myself.
Okay.
In relation to non-disclosure agreements, the NFCC doesn't kind of view them at kind of across fire and rescue services, and it'd certainly be down to individual fire and rescue services and their kind of positions as to whether or not they were advised to use them.
Can we find that out? Is there any way we can get that information?
Yeah, can see if we can find that out. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Daren, can I just go back to you with a specific question following the Sky News report 2 weeks ago, I think over 2 weeks ago, it might be 3, that the ambulance service suffers from a toxic culture. Students and female student council members experiencing misogyny and sexual harassment, if not on a daily basis, then on a weekly basis. You've given us a really positive picture this evening of the changes that have been made. What's being done to tackle that, and the article from Tracy Nichols in the Chief Executive of the College of Paramedics acknowledging that problems still exist? Yeah.
So what's changed over the years is that most ambulance, or all ambulance services, used to do all their own in-house training for all their students coming in, whether that was emergency medical technician, call handling, dispatch, paramedicine. But now paramedicine is a 3-year degree programme. So what we're having to now do is work with the multitude of different higher education institutes out there who are authorised to run the paramedic degree programmes, programmes of paramedic training. So what we're doing as a sector is we're working closely with our HEIs to make sure that they are talking and living and breathing all the stuff that we've spoken about today. And we're also working with the College of Paramedics, who have some kind of overview of the course curriculum that those universities have to teach. Where it then becomes an ambulance service kind of responsibility to some extent is that those students then come on placement to different ambulance services across not just ambulance services, but other NHS organisations across the UK. So we do have that in our sights around we need to do much more to make that experience for students better going forward. And as I've already said, the vast majority of our students are now female, which is a good thing coming into our organisations. But we've got that in our sights. We work with Tracy in the College of Paramedics. We're working with the HEIs and NHS England and others to make sure that that experience for students is better going forward.
Is it fair to say that your female staff are arriving with you already victims?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. They may have had lived experience in either previous occupations or growing up. I would imagine.
Is the education system that they are going through not protecting your female staff before they arrive with the ambulance service?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, isn't it? And I don't even know the percentage of the number of students who come into the ambulance sector on placement who have either had a previous occupation and are of a certain age, or whether they're literally straight out of school and gone straight onto a degree programme. And those will have different experiences, I suppose, of life. Yeah.
Thank you. Look, Kathryn, you used the word. I'm going to go there. Woke. How much of a problem is it that the banter defence often accompanies, well, the problem is the service, whether it be the fire service, the ambulance service, the NHS in general, has just gone woke?
I think that is probably a reflection of society. I think we hear it, I think I'm kind of looking at you all around the table. I think it's quite often kind of levelled at governments as well. And I think it's a societal issue. For me and for the National Fire Chiefs Council, we will absolutely be steadfast in our zero tolerance approach to what is appropriate and what isn't. And I think, as we've said, this is also about future-proofing. So, the level of societal tolerance will probably change over time. But what we have to do is to ensure, we need to be enforcing the highest standards as a public service, and we will continue to do that. We've got the trust and respect of the public, and for me as a Chief Fire Officer and for others in the National Fire Chiefs Council, we've got to maintain that. It's absolutely our duty to do so. So I may be woke, we may be woke, but I think there were people before us, great people, that would also be classed as woke. So long may it continue.
Kathryn, what role do EDI officers within the NHS have in tackling the culture of misogyny?
They have a really important role. The Sexual Safety Charter is embedded in EDI plan, so we've linked the work that EDI colleagues and the EDI plan are doing with our work on tackling sexual harassment and the Sexual Safety Charter implementation itself as well. We know that gender pay gap issues, there's a load of things that are set out in our EDI plan that have relevance here. So yeah, they have a key role, and that we'll be reporting back in terms of Sexual Safety Charter implementation as well.
Thank you. Kim?
And I have a couple of questions on improving behaviours. My first question is to Daren. CQC did a report in 2017 and 2022 looking at sexualised behaviour, but what they've said is that there's been no improvement in those intervening 5 years. So I just wanted to know whether you could provide any reasons why there has been no change.
Yeah, are you talking about ambulance-specific CQC reports, or are you talking about wider NHS CQC reports?
The reports on sexualised behaviour, overt and covert sexualised behaviour.
So that sounds like it could be an NHS-wide triangulation of CQC reports. Certainly from an ambulance sector point of view, I think we've already heard evidence that suggests that the CQC do look at this, They triangulate staff survey results, they speak to staff. one thing we've not touched upon today is that all ambulance services have now committed to, and we committed it through AACE, that they will all invest in networks, staff networks. So we've got a women's network, for example, diversity network, we've got disability network, and so on and so forth. And we use those networks as well to try and improve what we've been speaking about today. But in terms of the specifics about why is it not improved, I think I would need to go back and look at what that report was, and also look at historical staff survey results, because in some areas we are improving, and in other areas we've still got a long way to go, certainly from an ambulance sector point of view, because we do lag behind the rest of the NHS, if I'm being honest, when it comes to the staff survey results. But I can't comment specifically on that report, I'm sorry.
Can I just go back to a question that was raised earlier about escalations? And I just wanted to know whether your organisation collected data on any non-sexual contact offences, you know, whether that be upskirting, you know, cyber flashing and those kind of things that are kind of relatively new, and whether you have policies, specific policies to deal with those kind of things within your organisation.
So we will capture that data where we know about it. So whether that's captured anonymously through routes such as our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, may capture that information anonymously, and we'll be able to look at that data. Or it may be that it comes through and it's captured through things such as our HR case management. So I see at our Executive Leadership Committee all the HR case management stuff that's ongoing across the organisation. And we will capture information that you described there just now, in terms of we will try and break it down into, you know, what the description is and what type of offence or behaviour it is. Yeah.
The Reducing Misogyny and Improving Sexual Safety Strategy. Can you explain what services have to do in terms of that strategy, how it will be monitored, and what specific action will be taken against any staff member that's found to breach the Code of Conduct?
So I think we've already heard that I think NFCC is very similar to AACE, in that we're not a regulator of ambulance services. It's up to individual ambulance chief executives, who are the accountable officer, with the chairman and the board, to enforce and take appropriate action. What we've tried to do through AACE is we've produced that guidance document, and what we have asked chief executives of ambulance services to do is to adopt that document and to do what they can in terms of taking forward the various aspects and the best practice guidance contained within that document. NHS England and others do have the ability, through the regulatory powers, I think, as Kathryn already said earlier on, and CQC, to hold then individual ambulance services to account, to say, AACE have produced this document and best practice guidance, you tell us how you're enforcing it, or how you're implementing it, and what you're doing about it going forward.
You all mentioned that, you know, you're at a starting point, but there's still an awful lot to do to change the service. Daren, I wanted to know whether you could provide any examples where effective culture change has taken place anywhere.
Yeah, well, I think if I look at, you know, the North West Ambulance Services, using that as an example, because it's, you know, it's my organisation as well. I know that looking at our staff survey results year on year, that we have been improving. Okay, there is still a long way to go in certain aspects of our staff survey results, but I do see the gradual improvement. You know, this year, well, it's embargoed, so I can't say this year what it is, but there are, again, green shoots this year in terms of some of the metrics within the staff survey report. But as Kathryn said earlier on, I think it's embargoed until the end of March, so I can't go into any more detail than that. Yeah.
You're a former paramedic, and the incidence of sexualised behaviour within the service is higher than other. You know, I think they quote something like 84 out of 293 cases. And I just wanted to, whether you could explain why you thought that was the case within that specific service. Has it anything to do with the power imbalance, or younger paramedics coming in and fear reporting in case there's any reprisals? Have you seen any of that in your 30-odd years that you've been in the service?
Yeah, I think when I think back to being 16 years of age, working in operating theatres in NHS Lothian, and in 19 when I joined the ambulance sector, I saw it myself, as a male, and I know we're here talking about women's challenges and unacceptable behaviours towards them, but you could see it, and I could see it when I worked with female crewmates as well, or colleagues as well, that some of the unwarranted or unacceptable behaviour, by patients, by other members of staff back then, what was unacceptable now. But I think, as Kathryn says, I have seen a massive shift, actually, in that stuff that may have happened 35 years ago in an operating theatre or 33 years ago in an ambulance mess room or whatever, is gradually getting better and changing for the better. But I can't hand on heart say that we have completely eradicated every unacceptable conversation that may or may not take place, whether that's the public on the staff or staff on staff. But I do see a big shift. And the fact that we're having these conversations now and doing the work we're doing, and we do share the work that we're doing across the National Police and Fire Chiefs Council, not just on this, but mental health, health and wellbeing and other things that we're all involved in, can only be a positive thing.
Thank you, Daren. Kathryn, can you say what a zero-tolerance approach to sexual assault and harassment in the NHS actually means in practice? Will someone be sacked for a misogynistic joke? And just what sanctions would be taken?
Yeah, I know there's been quite a bit of discussion around the use of the term zero tolerance and what it means. And I think what it means is that if someone has sexually harassed or sexually assaulted someone, there will be zero tolerance of that particular behaviour. I know there was concern that it means that someone who had I can't remember the example that was given, but that all instances of sexual harassment would result in gross misconduct or something along those lines. What it is about is trying to lay the stall of this is something that cannot be tolerated in the organisation. We have clear policies that set out what constitutes sexual harassment, what behaviours are acceptable and what are not. And if your behaviour falls within that bucket, then action will be taken. So that's what.
I think the Chair asked a question before about whether that would apply to all grades.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The NFCC published its Culture Action Plan in July 23 and committed to providing regular update on progress. What tangible steps are you taking what tangible steps are you asking the Fire and Rescue Service to undertake?
So the key things around those, and there are 22, but I'll just go into some of them, is the implementation of the fire standards. So the core code of ethics is certainly one of the areas that all services are signed up to. As you said, the NFCC obviously can't mandate, but there is certainly, as I said, that commitment. The implementation of the fire standards around safeguarding, also the leadership fire standards. We've also seen lots of services have also taken on board the National Fire Chiefs Council culture statement and the zero tolerance piece, which we kind of talked about. The introduction of independent reporting lines, which I gave the information about earlier on, the professional leadership development courses, that's at each level, so the supervisory, the middle, and the executive leadership programme, which has been going on for quite a long time now. Culture dashboard, which I kind of spoke about, to get that consistency of collection of data, the challenging behaviour toolkit. There's also a couple of bits as well, because I'm sure you've got other questions, but there's also the listen and learn sessions. So we talked about, that kind of how can we begin to get people in a room to understand societal change, difference, perceptions. So the lunch and learn sessions that we run, probably you get in excess of 200 people from across the fire sector that attend them on Teams, not in person. Sorry, I saw your face. Sorry, Chair.
I thought you were doing lunch for 200.
You bring your own lunch, absolutely, yeah. And it's the opportunity to talk about different, we have White Ribbon, we've also had people from LGBT that identify as LGBT. We have people that have, that have got that lived experience around, what it's like to be a black person in the fire service. So again, those are topics that normally to be quite honest, 10 years ago just wouldn't get discussed or even talked about. So there's a number of, we've had the menopause conference last year, bringing together about 150 women to begin to progress menopause policies and different ways of working to kind of help provide support as we approach that time of our lives. And also culture conference, which we had last year for the first time, and we've got the next one scheduled in July. That's just a quick example, snapshot.
One final question. For those people who are found to be guilty of sexual harassment cases and they're eligible for their pensions, are they able to take their pensions if they're sacked, or do they lose everything?
I don't know the answer to that question.
It's been cited in the media recently.
I imagine that's a Department for Health and Social Care and Treasury conversation.
I need to come back to you.
Yeah.
That would be down to individual fire and rescue service, not something that the NFCC would be able to comment on.
So if they're found guilty, they shouldn't really be accessing their pensions. That's what I'd say.
Can I thank all of the witnesses for your evidence this afternoon? If there is anything, I think there are a couple of points for all of you to pick up on. We would appreciate receiving that in writing. And I'm going to suspend the meeting for just a couple of minutes to bring in the next panel. Order.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
Good afternoon, and thank our second panel for attending this afternoon's session in our inquiry about escalating violence against women and girls. Can I welcome Assistant Chief Constable Samantha Millar, Strategic Programme Director for VAWG for the National Police Chiefs Council, and Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy, the Professionalism Lead for the Metropolitan Police Service. Thank you for coming along this afternoon. Can I just check, are you content that we use your first names as we did with the previous panel?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. And you will have heard the evidence that we've already had from the previous session. Can I just start with some questions about the attitudes that still exist towards women within policing? And specifically, we all know about the November 22 Inspectorate report that concluded there was a culture of misogyny, sexism and predatory behaviour towards female members of staff persisting in the police force. Do you even know what proportion of female officers and staff across the UK have been sexually assaulted or harassed by a colleague at work? And that's to Samantha, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a absolutely appropriate question to start with, the scale and nature of the workforce. I would say all of those female colleagues, and I have a view that we recognise the sorts of day-to-day sexism and misogyny that's being called out. And that's a really, really tough place to be when you're in something as difficult and demanding as policing. And that is not something that we can back away from. The fact, though, that we're having the conversation and it's live and it's energised in policing and female colleagues are talking about it is a movement in our culture. So it's been good to hear the panel before us, to hear fire service, ambulance talk about that shift in the culture. Because we're not starting again, we're just moving the culture, and the culture has to move on. You know, you look at the messages coming out of Louise Casey's review, and I recognise, I've got 30 years plus of service, and I recognise all of those behaviours. You know, I'm a senior police officer. I've sat on misconduct panels week in, week out, and we have got rid of people we do not want in policing. But it can't stop there, can it? It can't stop there. We don't want those people in policing, but we've got to move on. And that's where this sort of systemic, cultural, methodological change has to happen. So it doesn't surprise me, Chair, that the starting question is, you know, do we know the scale and nature of the threat? I know the scale and nature of the threat because I'm a female working in policing and I work alongside my colleagues day in, day out. And that's why the sort of efforts that we've been going to for the last few years, a lot of it based on that HMIC report that really said policing has to do something different, has to come at this with a real surge of activity and a seriousness. It's got to make a difference.
Is the surge of activity empowering, encouraging, enabling women to report?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what's the scale of the difference?
And I would say we're doing a few things to try and quantify that. So we set off a lot on the back of that report, which was absolutely right about policing having to take the recommendations that have made year in, year out seriously. We've got to take them forward. We've got to tackle some of these really difficult issues. So the surge of activity did set off at the beginning a requirement that we understand the scale and nature. So you'll be aware, Chair, probably in many of the conversations, and I know that we've talked about it, that we had to set out the scale and nature of what was happening inside policing before we looked at anything else. We did that very quickly, 6 months after the surge of activity, and we got a scale and nature of it. But it was a really difficult process to go through, had many issues within the systems that we operate that made it a challenge to really come back with a valid picture. And so our commitment was to try again. And we are on our second year of doing that. So in May this year, we'll be reporting again about what does that insider threat picture look like? What's the scale and nature of what we think is happening inside policing? And that's absolutely a commitment we've made. And we recognise, Chair, that that's got to be something that's done annually. And we've got to be constantly looking within policing and trying to answer that question. Because if we don't understand the scale and nature, then we're not going to know where to start, where to put our efforts and where to prioritise. And that's critically important.
We heard specifically from the NHS about the challenges of collecting data across a myriad of different systems. Is that the same for policing? And why? I think we're probably both going to have very, very clear thoughts about this. I think it is a real problem. I think we've got multiple systems that have legacies that don't often operate across each other. The join up is really difficult. Coordinating 43 forces and the systems that they choose. So just one example, Chair, is we don't record crime in a unified, systematic way across all of policing. Police forces have got the opportunity to choose the systems that they often put in place, and sometimes they don't talk across each other. So trying to work across systems within a force that sometimes aren't compatible, and then on a national level trying to gather that capability. So when we went about trying to understand what the scale and nature of the threats, at points we were asking people to review spreadsheets. That can't be how we go forward in policing. So there's some systemic problems with being able to hold ourselves to account for what's happening across policing. When we did go through that process, it was the first time we'd ever asked for that national data to be collected. So again, we came across the sorts of problems you do when you go through that process for the first time. So I'll say yes, our systems, our data collection capability is really challenging. I don't want to interpret this wrong. Did you just tell me that even within single forces there were different methods of collecting data?
Within forces, there's a force capability, and of course, often big forces are broken down into different boroughs and districts, and of course, systemically, that can sometimes not be compatible as well.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you this, Samantha. Why has it been tolerated? Why has systematic misogyny and sexism been tolerated for so long? Is that the gender balance of policing? Is it, apologies, just cultural? Is this something that is going to take a long time to dig out because it's so ingrained?
Chair, I think there are so many lenses to look at answering that question. Policing is hugely historic. You know, we have policed for hundreds of years, and we've built our systems upon systems upon systems. But we have come at it from a lens that probably hasn't been as representative of the society as we've moved forward. We've also, we are a public service, so the demands on public service mean that we have to make decisions about where we put our resource, what we can afford, where we spend our monies. So I think the challenge is always how to buy in, how to bring in, how to implement the most effective capability we've got, and sometimes that's not always available to us. So I think trying to revolutionise and reform systems that are absolutely embedded is really, really complex, and we can't do that. It takes a long time to bring it, therefore, systemic change. So I think it's because it's being built on a platform in a way which is probably quite linear, as opposed to the complexity I think that society demands of policing now. So social media, I know we're going to go on to social media, is a really interesting one. It's really, really difficult to keep up with social media and understand how we manage that, and how we use it as a tool for the good, because it has got some fantastic opportunities and it does us a great service at times. But how do we get ahead of people misbehaving on it? How do we monitor it? We are becoming more and more of an encrypted capability. How on earth are we going to investigate and track and monitor our staff and know if anybody's misbehaving on it if we can't access it? So it's very difficult for public sector to often have the get ahead of where change in technology in particular is going.
So I get quite angry at this public sector argument because I want our public services to be better. I want to look at police, fire, ambulance, our armed services, our schools, and say, well, they're better than the CBI, they're better than OD asset management, and I don't feel that they are. And I think that, and I stick Parliament in that as well. I want us to be the gold standard. So look, isn't it just a bit lazy to say it's a public service and our priorities are elsewhere if we can point at examples of misogyny, sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape being perpetrated by police officers?
Chair, I would say I've been both military and police, and I'm immensely proud of both, because I think I come at it from a value set that I protect and care and safeguard us, society. So I actually think I am better than the CBI and all the others that you named there. So I'm going to defend public sector. I think we're brilliant, but we often do it without the capability and the resource that we need. So I don't think we're lazy. I think it's hugely complex. As I say, I've worked in police in 30 years, and it is immensely difficult to systemically change the operating environment. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't be challenged. I've spent my service challenging inappropriate behaviour, poor standards, sexism, day in, day out. I came in as a young graduate. I had a label on me from the beginning. And you have got to, you've got to care about what you do to keep that going. So I think the public sector is utterly brilliant, and I wouldn't want to change it. But I will defend it that, we often do lack the resource to have the best kit and the best capability and be head of some of these really difficult problems.
I think you just summed it up then, that you came in as a young graduate and you stayed with a label on your back as a woman in the police service. Has it been easier for you to call out poor behaviour when you've seen it as a woman than it's been for some male colleagues? Or is it just because you're senior now?
I don't think it's ever been easy. I feel as I've progressed through policing, I've felt more weight on my shoulders to do it, to influence, to bring along with me those people I work with. So I've never put the word easy I think you have to be hugely courageous in policing, because I turn up every day. I feel like I'm going off out. I turn up every day to do the best job I can. So there's nothing easy about that in policing, to meet the needs of the people who need policing. So there's nothing easy. But the vast majority of colleagues, Chair, that I've ever worked with are brilliant, competent, caring staff. You know, that's why I'm 30 years plus and I'm still in policing. I love it. But that's not to say it doesn't have its problems, because it does. But some of them are systemic, and we have to challenge that. And I give you one really small example. But you know, I do my fitness test every year, and I love doing it with an all-female group now, because it makes me feel good. You know, it makes me feel that I'm okay. I'm still passing it, and I don't want to do it with young recruits anymore, because they're fast and I can't keep up. But some forces still don't have that as an option. And we're pushing that why should you not meet the needs of your workforce? We're getting an older workforce who are staying longer, and that's great because we bring experience. But we absolutely should be changing and meet the needs of the people working inside it. And that's just one really small example, but a really, really important one.
Thank you. Stuart, does the Met have a bigger problem than all of the other police forces?
Chair, good afternoon, committee members as well. A bigger problem? Yes, simply in terms of scale, because we are the largest police service within the UK. Absolutely. Proportion, I'm happy to share with you this afternoon. You know, some of the data, because we have let women and girls down. Echo what Sam was saying at the start. I've been in service about the same length of time as Sam. I've seen lots of changes. Is the scale larger than other forces as a proportion? The light has certainly been shone brighter on us than most other police forces, and rightly so. The work we are doing now is uncovering more and more, which means difficult cases. I had another one today of a former officer who's been convicted of very serious offences. And we will keep doing that, because it is an absolute journey to try and get to. It's never going to be an end goal, but trying to incrementally make that difference to deal with some of those systemic issues like Sam has referred to. But I think, Chair, one of the questions you posed about, does it get easier to call things out? I think it does get easier the more you go on in any service, in any profession, in any walk of life, undoubtedly. But the thing that will make the difference, and that we are endeavouring to do in the Met, is by creating the right environment, helps people call it out, no matter who they are, no matter what their length of service, no matter where they are operating, where they are working. It's tough to create that environment, and I've always been one for you need to do quite symbolic actions and acts and differences, and it won't be perfect every single time, but you've got to keep at it in a very, very relentless way.
And the light shining brighter on the Met, does that actually give you an opportunity? Absolutely agree with you on that, Chair. An opportunity, some may see things as a threat, and you know it is difficult. The overwhelming majority of our colleagues, and I think Sam, you were saying it yourself, turn up to work, whether they are police officers, whether they are police staff, whether they are volunteers, whoever they may be, to do the best possible job that they can do. The number of officers and staff, but it's primarily officers, that corrupt their integrity are the ones that we need to get out of the police service. It's going back to being relentless, and that's where we need to be relentless about following those who are the perpetrators and helping support and enable those, well, preventing it in the first place, but where things do occur, help people to come forward. And we were the first service that introduced an anonymous national reporting line for conduct and complaints through Crime Stoppers, now been adopted nationally. So our internal reporting has gone up threefold. More or less since Sir Mark came in as the Commissioner. And I see that is the opportunity, because of the very difficult situation that we've been in the Met. We need to grasp that opportunity to help people internally to wrestle with some of these deeper things. And you mentioned culture, and there are always cultures in cultures as well as we understand. And the AACE report identified that there were certain roles and commands within the Met where there might be a particular problem. Is that accurate? and what's being done to tackle it?
So the short answer, Chair, yes. There's, as I mentioned, culture and culture. So Louise Casey called out particularly in terms of our specialist firearms commands. So there were, very, very, high-profile cases that we are all aware of connected to those commands. And we have been doing much more in those places than some others, as well as across the whole of the organisation. I mean, the Parliamentary Diplomatic Protection Command, which was one of those that was called out, whole new senior leadership team. Now, that isn't the answer on its own, but you need to do some symbolic changes. Louise Casey called out many issues about that command, including supporting those in there who were turning up to do the best possible jobs that they could do, but were not well supported, well equipped, well led by us as the organisation.
Can I just ask a question on symbolic change? So look, we can all understand that there will be instances where that is important. How much does that then facilitate cultural change beneath?
How much, I think, is potentially a difficult question to answer. I think it is definitely a significant factor. My view of policing, I'm a public servant, but we often build things based on stories. I think in policing we do like the stories of events and incidents and responses and supporting victims and caring for communities. So I think the symbolic thing, I think, is one of those stories of which you can hang off other underlying systematic cultural changes. So we are introducing, as part, following Louise Casey's review and her recommendations, a new culture, diversity, inclusion directorate, of which has a significant enabling factor for us around tackling misogyny and police conduct. We have a very regulated conduct framework within policing, which we operate in, which has its advantages maybe compared to some other professions. But cultural change is not done simply through legislation or regulation. It takes senior leaders, it takes leaders. I remember as a young recruit police officer being told you are a leader, because when you go out as a police officer, it's not when you get to a sergeant or an inspector or a senior rank. All police officers and indeed staff in policing are leaders in their own right, and everybody has that individual responsibility and that collective responsibility of the things that we're discussing.
And are the Casey review recommendations being put in place fast enough? Do we want to do them faster and deeper? Absolutely. There is a tension of balance, like Sam has talked about, in terms of how we can prioritise all the things that we wish to do. I think if Sir Mark were here, and he said it before, he did not want to be a commissioner who would be talking about more trust, less crime and high standards. Didn't want to be the high standards one. That should go without saying, but that has certainly been where we've put an incredible amount of focus within the Met Police this time, because it is one of those enabling foundations for us to deliver much greater trust and less crime for Londoners.
Chair, can I come in as well, just to compliment, because I know Stuart's absolutely got focus on the Met. I think if I was sat in front of Louise Casey now, and I have listened to, as probably all of us have, her description of what she found many, many times, and it's so powerful that it's such an opportunity. And Louise Casey should say to Stuart and I, so what's the difference? What have you done? And of course, we absolutely have got to be held accountable to that. So there's something here about where do you start when we talk about this big system, this traditional system that is really on a move and operates in a certain way, very hierarchical and very, very set in practice procedure of the way it operates. But there's something, first of all, about you've got to look in and you've got to understand your workforce, your mix, the health and well-being, everything that you've sort of talked to as a committee today. So one of the things was that we've never done in my service is, look at every single member of police officer and police staff and understand, is there any risk sat in there that we are not aware of? Now that is an enormous task, but we did it. And I'm not aware that it wasn't done properly, lawfully, carefully, systematically. And it brought out, yes, a number of people we needed to go back. And we will go back to all of those people and understand what the options are. Some of them are criminal investigations, some of them are misconduct. But largely it came out with, you know, the majority of people, police officers and police staff, that they are fit to be in policing. And so you then build on that. Now, is that because we're not listening? Is the culture and is the opportunity for our officers to talk about what it's like being in policing is there? So Stuart's talking about Sigma, which has been a fantastic activity in the Met to bring about the opportunity for the workforce to talk to us, to talk to policing about what they're seeing and what they're feeling inside policing. And we've got to carry on that. We've just refreshed the Code of Ethics. You know, helping our young leaders, our early supervisors, to really understand how to call out systematic problems, you know, early indicators of poor behaviour. Like our ambulance colleague said, we could all point at the ones that we think are the bad apples. You know, well, let's call it out for that and give people the skills to be able to do it. So there's a number of things. The College of Policing has worked really at pace over the last couple of years to give a training capability to all of our frontline supervisors around how to address misabuse and harassment behaviours in the workplace. So there are so many activities ongoing that I would want to describe to Louise Casey. It is by no means going to sort everything, but policing have got to show a commitment that it wants to unpick and unpeel, you know, the systems and practices that are in place, because a lot of them, you know, are not working for us in our workforce, and we've got to listen to that.
Thank you. Kim.
Thanks, Chair. Samantha, I have a couple of questions on social media, and you've just mentioned about the difficulty in dealing with some of those cases, and there has been some high-profile cases only this week. You know, police officers were found sharing pictures from the Nottingham attacks. You know, one was reprimanded and one was given a final written warning. You know, but so do you think that any police officer who was found guilty of sharing across any social media platform should be instantly dismissed because that kind of action is unacceptable?
I absolutely agree with your sentiment. We have to deal with everything that comes in front of us. What I want, though, is fairness of process. You know, Stuart's stated it. We are absolutely bound up by rules, regulations, procedures. What I want to give you, though, is confidence is of every single misconduct process that I've been part of, that systematic look of the evidence, the proof and what we need is laid before us. And where the evidence is produced and where we can, we take action. And I'm quite prepared, and I would support anybody to do that. Social media is for me is not the issue. Social media is a tool. It's about how it's used. It's about what it's used for. And like you, committee member, I cannot look at the murders of those people in Nottingham and understand that behaviour. But I've got to let it be judged and done within the regulations.
You mentioned before about how it's monitored and how many are actually involved in undertaking, you know, this type of action. You know, Stuart, do you have anything you wanted to contribute to that?
So I do think it's an excellent question. So I just jotted down. So I look back over time, and I think, like Sam was saying, it's not one social media platform or another. It's the tool. It's the vehicle that's used. Do I think in policing over previous years we have looked at it in the lens that you brilliantly described? No, I don't. Do we look at it in that way now? Yes, we absolutely do. And in fact, we find it, certainly in the Met, and I'm sure it'll be exactly the same in many other forces, that many of the cases that come to light, and I'm absolutely with Sam, they go into investigations, and if there is a case to answer, you know, breach of our standards of professional behaviour, then they should go all the way through to whatever the outcome of that process will be. And what we see in many of these cases now is so we have lawful business monitoring. All police forces have it. That's for, of course, the sort of work-related devices. But as police officers, we have our standards are for us whether we are on duty or off duty, quite different to some other professions. And we find that some of these sort of cases that come to light, you mentioned Nottingham, there's been reporting today of a recent case that's been now being investigated within London. obviously can't go into the specific details, but we find on many occasions that it's back to creating the environment. It is individuals in our service who are raising these concerns with us, as well as us, finding themselves through our proactive endeavours and the many tactics and techniques that we have.
I think, sorry,
Carolyn, in a minute.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you very briefly, thanks, Kim. Before this all came to light, before the light was shone, as it were, what was happening then? Were people reporting things in?
In terms of social media?
Well, everything. I mean, when there were incidents, when things weren't quite right, when people didn't feel right, when there was stuff on social media, I mean, was nobody saying anything?
No, I saw some people certainly were, and a bit like Sam was saying, they've in my experience in policing, they've always been individuals, always been leaders. I say everybody's a leader in lots of different ways. Always been people that have come forward, called out concerns that they may have, or indeed things that may have happened to them. Did everybody do it who was a victim of whatever the offender might be? Certainly not. And that's where we've been putting huge endeavours in London and the Met to help people build that confidence amongst each other, support them so they do come forward. Do I think we are identifying everything today? I'd be absolutely naive if I sat here and said that we were. No. Are we much further along that and down that journey? Yes, we certainly are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, Kim.
The Inspectorate has found examples where officers have used suspects' phones to download pornography and send explicit pictures to female members of staff. So I just wanted to know from both of you how big a problem is pornography in the force, and are you monitoring the escalation of any of these cases?
I'll start with that one, Stuart, if it's okay. That is a really timely question, because there is an ongoing review of the use of pornography, and in particular the impact it has on children. So it's very topical. Have I seen an increase with the use within our workplace? And I personally haven't sat on more panels. However, what I would say on most of the misconduct that you do sit on, there is a misuse of telephony or social media becoming more prevalent. So I think we are going to see, as we see crime types change, as technologies change, I think that's going to reflect in our workforce as well. So we probably will. But I think societal issues around pornography are playing through to some extent here. So we shouldn't be surprised. But that means that we should be preempting it and asking ourselves questions. Have we got the right practices and procedures in place? Are we looking for it? Are we looking in the right places? Are we asking the right questions? So we've got to keep up with society. The change is so quick and fast, and we can't be behind it.
Yeah, if I may build on that. So are we seeing substantial increases? Not that we are actually seeing, no, but are we seeing cases? Yes. Primarily through individuals, personal device and the like, and there have been some that have been well reported in London. Maybe a subset of that question is, do I think it's a potentially growing threat and risk? I'll be candid, I do. Speaking to colleagues outside of here, the availability of pornography is quite a challenge, isn't it? We're all aware of that and recognise it. But it's also the type of pornography which probably, I don't know, I see her as a father as well, that's the sort of thing that sort of worries me most, for society as a whole, but certainly within policing. But that's why our various sort of things that we do, both in terms of overt reporting and investigations to us, as well as, and all forces have a lot of covert policing and proactive capabilities. It's what we do, and we do is, we use the same tools, the same techniques internally to tackle these corrupt activities as we would in terms of tackling organised crime or whatever the criminality might be.
Thanks, Stuart, because our committee has found that violence against women and girls, it's often pornography, which is a determining factor, given that so many young children have free access to it at this moment in time, and it is changing attitude towards what is sex and what is unacceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. First, can I come back to you, Sam? Because when you're articulating, that you've been a police officer for 30 years, at the time you were starting your career in West Yorkshire Police, I was a civilian in South Yorkshire Police. Do you think my experience of misogyny and sexism would have been different to yours as a police officer at that time?
Gosh, that's an interesting debate to go down, isn't it? I'm amazed after many years of being in policing how different forces are. So you can have neighbouring forces, and gosh, Stuart sits in one of the biggest one, and it's different again. And so all forces, having worked in a couple now, I realise they really do have their own culture. Yeah. Policing isn't different, and I think the public are not really bothered where we come from. They just want a good service. But we know, don't we, that our forces are very different. So it doesn't surprise me that even within the Yorkshire forces, we had different experiences. But I do also think that there is, and it really has changed over my career, the delineation between police officers and police staff. I would say I am so proud of police staff, because I think they are the backbone and keep our organisation going. They often do it absolutely unrecognised and without often a clear compensation as well for what they're doing. So it's really difficult, but of course we send our police officers out into some of the most physically and emotionally and difficult scenarios as well. But thank goodness we've got both in the organisations. But my experience over the years is often that our police staff can often feel very undervalued, and that really saddens me, because it takes everybody to make an organisation work, and some of the best colleagues I work with are my police staff colleagues. So, like anything, it's a mixture, but I suppose I'm recognising your point. Different forces really do have different cultures, and even within our forces, depending on where you are, I can appreciate different experiences again.
Interestingly, because when I joined South Yorkshire Police, it was just post the Hillsborough disaster. And if you look, this is actually relevant to this, if you look at the culture that prevailed at that stage and which informed everything, it was very male. Yeah. And the reaction to that was much more, less aggressive, shall we say. And you can see that within different police officers. And leadership is obviously central at this. And to what extent do you think, really, in order for us to make progress in these issues, it absolutely has to be the priority of the Chief Constable? I'll start with you, Sam, on that. Chiefs are brilliant at one thing, and they're brilliant at many things, but they're brilliant at one thing, and that is chiefs absolutely own their forces. Every chief stands up bold and strong and really protects and looks after their forces. Their domain, and I think that's brilliant. I think that's a character of policing. I think it's a character of the 43 forces we've got. It can cause us problems at times because you've got 43 different views, and that sometimes is a challenge. But in the forces I've worked in, your chief really sets your tone. Yeah. And the chief does set the direction of travel, the tone, the outlook, and certainly the forces I've worked in, I felt very connected with my chief. And of course, I generally never see them. But, your chief is incredibly important in the leadership role. That's the point I'm trying to make. And I think that's how it should be, because the chiefs take the responsibility and they're accountable, and they should set the tone and they should lead the way, and they should take people like Stuart and I as their leadership teams as we've progressed through the years, really clearly about what they want us to do, and how they want us to do it, and the values they set. So, but of course that cascades down for me. I want my chief to tell me what they need me to do, because I'll do it. I'm part of their organisation. So the chiefs are incredibly important, but so are the command structure that sits around them, because of course they cascade it through the organisation. So what went wrong in the Met then, Stuart? I mean, to end up with the case review, which found that that misconduct, the process for investigation misconduct was just not fit for purpose, and actually bad behaviour was frankly allowed to flourish. Where's it gone wrong with the leadership within the structure?
So I was speaking to colleagues yesterday. So I took over this role literally 12 months ago yesterday. Many said to me, crikey, were you away from work on holiday when Sir Mark was, moving around some of his senior team? And I said, no, I volunteered for it.
Excellent. That's good news.
Yeah. I joined policing to make a difference.
Yeah.
I think everybody does. We might sometimes describe it in different ways. And I definitely want to take on this role because I think I can help make a difference, not on my own, but as part of that big, broad team. So in terms of what went wrong, and I think the Chair asked the first question early on to me about, is it different in the Met? What we are facing is not unique, but we have some uniqueness with our scale, which brings its own challenges when everything happens at such volume. That the chief, and the tone I agree with Sam, absolutely, chiefs set a tone for an organisation, but they don't come up with their own plans and their own, this is what's going to happen. They engage, they consult externally as well as internally. I think what happened in London, and this is partly the same in other forces, this isn't something new and recent. This is a build-up over many years of challenges as many public services in terms of where do we prioritise. And I think back to my time, and if I may draw a parallel, so as a relatively young detective in the Met, I was around when we did the huge focus on anti-corruption activity, and we built, which many referred to at the time as the Ghost Squad, our really the first true counter-corruption capability. And that was quite a game changer internally in terms of how it felt and what it meant about calling out, primarily focused at many detectives, but also other colleagues as well. And then I think since that point in time, where the focus is very much on organised criminality, it wasn't completely fixed, but in terms of the significance of it, how much of it was going on, drastically reduced because of all the activity and the covert policing that we did against colleagues. And then I think in that time, over then a few decades, I think the eye got taken off professional standards for what it was, and not seeing the emerging changes and the threats and the risks. We're talking about social media. It's not just about that, but how things were changing. And so we've always had professional standard units in the Met, as is every other force. But I think it just wasn't seen as the priority it needed to be in the way that I'd like to hope if we had in policing, we wouldn't have ended up in the predicament that we did. So I said at the start, we've let down many people, both in terms of Londoners and those that meet, visit and work in London, but also our people and things that we've been talking about earlier this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, policing is a career that attracts alpha males, and alpha males are very competitive, and I guess really, if you're going to build a healthy culture, it really does have to be completely nipped in the bud, because we see it in politics all the time. Some men will always use ways of intimidating colleagues, but we're pushing enough to deal with it. But obviously, when it comes to other contexts, it can become quite menacing, and in particular. In terms of misconduct, there's one thing actually witnessing and dealing with misconduct actually in the workplace, but obviously there are other issues of criminality outside the workplace, and particularly the case review highlighted domestic abuse. What have you done to actually deal with that aspect?
Do you mean in terms of the abuse of power by police officers?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So that has been a huge focus for us, under Sir Mark as well. So we, Sam was referring earlier about understanding what are the risks in our organisation. So in the Met, all forces have done, I think Sam was referring to, which is in essence a data wash against the police national database, which is the police national intelligence system, which all forces feed into to see are there things which we don't know about our officers and staff. We've gone a lot further than that in London. So in light of the significant cases, in light of Louise Case's review, we have looked back at 10 years with our focus on violence against women and girls. We've looked back at 10 years of any allegation, no matter what it was, whether it was a criminal, a conduct, just an internal thing that didn't meet a conduct threshold, anybody previously investigated, and that could be a single allegation, or it could be, sadly we have some who have multiple allegations against them, over 10 years to try and identify, right, so what is the risk of these individuals who are still in policing? How many of them pose a threat, a risk to their colleagues, or indeed to members of the public? So that equates over a 10-year period, so it's just over 1,600 officers and staff in the Met who have at least one allegation relating to sexual offences or domestic abuse. We have been the force that has led the way. We've built so I think part of one of the things you said earlier, I was sitting here thinking, so, you know, in terms of how do we, so is everybody an alpha male who joins? No. Does it attract some? Attract some? Yes, absolutely. But we've brought in a new approach to vetting. So no police officer in the country has ever left policing because they've had their vetting removed from them. So that 1,600 or so that I've referred to, we have referred over, it's about 125 at this point in time, there'll be more going into this vetting review process that is looking at the whole history of those individuals. Some have, as I said earlier, some have multiple allegations at different points in time against them, some not. But this is the ones who are the highest threat and the highest risk. Ultimately, the process we've built in, and the Home Office, through the dismissals review, are looking to change the regulations that will allow us a regulatory pathway to exit officers who lose vetting. At the moment, we don't have that pathway, so we've taken another approach, which we think is legally sound. It's not been challenged. And we've already had, I'll get my numbers correct if I may. So there's already 22 individuals who have exited under this process. Now, interestingly, sorry if I may, Chair, the plan with this is they would go to what we would call a gross incompetence hearing. It's not a conduct hearing, it's a performance hearing, and that's the path we would take it down. Out of those 22 who have left, only one has gone all the way to the hearing. 21 others have decided themselves at different points along the way to leave the Met. I can't say what their individual motivations were, clearly, but I think most people could pose a question on that.
I mean, I don't want to forgo you, because you're just the messenger. You picked up this challenge.
Volunteered for it.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's actually staggering that actually that accountability hasn't happened before. And, you know, you mentioned, you said you're leading the way. Is that true? Because, I mean, you know, I've been a Member of Parliament for 14 years. I've lost count a number of times I've stood up in the House and criticised the Met for poor culture. I'm satisfied things are happening now, but for me it's rather late. But, you know, is the Met leading the way, or is it an outlier?
It's not leading the way in everything, in the totality of what we're discussing here. In some aspects, you know, we've put another 25% of our, you know, in terms of our professional standards and vetting workforce, we've put because this is such a priority for us, we are investing heavily to make the difference now, like you described. I wouldn't profess to say the Met is leading the way in everything. There are brilliant things that happen in other police forces, and one of the, whilst we might have 43 chief constables, like Sam says, we are connected as policing, and we are forever looking at other forces, no matter where they may be, in terms of, well, what has worked. And the vetting process I've just been talking through, we have shared, and that's been borrowed with pride by others, and brilliant to see. And we've done things the other way around. And part of what Louise Casey said, and one of her recommendations, was about, you know, the misconduct system in the Met is not fit for purpose. And so it's not for us. Yes, you know, I've spent most of my time in the Met. I have worked in another police force as well. But we have done the look externally as to, well, how do we translate what might work in it might be a smaller police force, a smaller organisation, and indeed outside of policing, because these issues are not unique to policing, as to what can we take, what can we then sort of reinterpret to make work the challenges, work for the challenges that we face as well.
So, I mean, I represent a constituency adjacent to the Metropolitan Police. So there is a lot of cross-fertilisation between Essex Police and the Met, people to and from. And I speak to police officers, and they always say to me, Essex is not like the Met, meaning it's got a better culture. So do you think one of the things is the size of the organisation in terms of what you have to lead? So Essex is what, 3,000 police officers compared to how is it?
Over 30.
Yeah.
I've worked in another force as well. I think that's part of policing culture, which is you look at another force or they're nothing like us. Do I think
There works in both, yeah.
So there are always organisational differences. Your question about is size the problem? Size itself is not the problem. So Mark has made it really clear that this is one of the most significant things for his commissionership as part of reforming the organisation, and tackling this does not sit in isolation to all the other things that we are doing as well. The job of myself, my colleagues and the brilliant people that work with me and for me is to deal with these things and find the way through the difficulties, which sometimes scale can be a challenge, but equally scale brings really advantages and great opportunities for me. So one of the you may or may not have seen it yet, but the AACE, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, they published a report yesterday. So they've looked at about 120 individual cases across a sample of police forces. And one of the key things in there and in the previous super complaint is about when allegations come in against police officers, making sure that those they're investigating are not connected. The concerns, and rightly so, that you've got somebody investigating, primarily officers, and an officer who they've worked with before and things like that. An advantage for the Met, because of its scale, is that we can easily deal with that. Having worked in much smaller organisation, police force, it can be a real tension. So many forces will ask other forces to undertake their investigations. We have a way that we can manage that. We brought in the Met, and again the scale assists us, a dedicated professional standards team that deals with nothing apart from allegations of domestic abuse and sexual offences connected to police officers and staff. We're able to do that because the scale of the NPS, we absolutely needed to do it, but we're able to resource it because the organisation has scale. So there are, as ever, there's always pros and cons, aren't there?
I mean, you both refer to, having cultures that encourage people to call this out, and you both said that you've had experience of doing exactly that. But what was clear from the case review was that there didn't appear to be any repercussions from bad behaviour, so it became embedded. But also worse than that, for those people that did call it out, they could actually find themselves at the focus of quite a lot of intimidation. Yeah. So what are you doing to actually tackle that aspect of it? Yeah,
if I may, could I focus on the victims, the complainants first, if I may? So you're absolutely right. And have we, at points in time in the past, let individuals down? Absolutely, and we should have been able to do much more at the time. What we have in place now is a and there's lots of things already, and there'll be other things in development which will, undoubtedly come to fruition in the weeks and months ahead as well. But when it comes to our conduct investigations, our internal investigations into colleagues, where people have stepped up and stepped forward, they have much greater support and wraparound. Again, I think I've said it about something. It would be wrong of me to sit and say every single case is perfect and every single occasion that wraparound, the welfare support is as good as it needs to be. One of the things which we identified is where an officer has been investigated and there was a decision made as a case to answer, which will take them through to a gross misconduct hearing. It is a bit like victims of domestic abuse and sexual offences going to Crown Court. So colleagues that have been in this position will never have gone to a conduct hearing. It's a judicial process. Yeah. And so the things that we've established in policing over many years to support victims through that process when it comes to Crown Court and Magistrates Court, we have now replicated that in terms of the victim care that we provide internally. And sorry, forgive me, the first part of your question, I can't remember quite what it was now.
Shall I take it?
Sorry.
Because you've done a great job there with what's happening in the Met. But I think, again, just unpicking that question, it is not going to be sorted out, as Stuart said, just by giving our staff a toolkit, or it's many layers, isn't it? It's giving people the confidence that as things are played in front of them in an organisation, what confidence have they got? They're going to be believed, they're going to be listened to, they can do it anonymously if they need to. Do you know, all those processes that will make it much more likely that somebody's going to call out some of that bad behaviour. but more than anything, it's got to be led and demonstrated. It's got to be behaved. So everybody from your, the chief, but, your BCU commanders, your local commanders, setting behaviour standards and behaving and cascading that through their leadership team is so important. And when teams know and police stations know when something's happened, and it's then what then happens. So it's demonstrating that you're doing what you say you're going to do, and it's not swept under the carpet. Because the minute it is, people will just close down and say, well, I'm, it's too much risk there for me.
You've got to have the right leaders at all levels.
Absolutely. There is no point having a chief that is absolutely determined to lead the way and sets all. If you haven't got that value set throughout, and therefore it's about your leadership selection as well, and it's absolutely got to be about a diverse mix of people. You need a real range of all sorts.
That blend of skills and empathy and all the rest of it. Now, can I ask you both? In terms of sexual misconduct by police officers, are victims more likely to be colleagues or members of the public? Do we know? Do we have the data?
Stuart, I'll start with this one because as part of the work that we did in 21-22, we wanted to understand, of course, what the threat of police officers, police staff, being perpetrators. But of course, as a side product of that, we got to understand our victim profile more. So that's really important, but again, we were really constrained with data in terms of how valid a picture were we getting, how had it been reported, etc. So I think this year we'll probably do a lot better in being able to say, what does that mean? How many of those were working inside the organisation? But of course, the volume of domestic abuse reporting invariably probably means that victims outside the organisation will outweigh that because of the nature of the volume. But the percentage of understanding the victims inside the organisation, I think, is an incredibly important question we need to carry on trying to answer, because that's what we need to know and understand.
If we look at sexual violence as being a weapon of power, and we're talking about an organisation with competitive alpha males, that is a tool, isn't it, to advance against the competition. And I think that's the thing that really I want to get a handle on in terms of that behaviour.
But I just do want to pick up the point that Stuart was saying. I do think that our organisation and the nature of how we're recruiting and the types of traits that we've recruited in the last few years is changing. So we recognise, I believe police and others recognise it needs a real mixture. And it needs different skill sets to do different roles. One size does not fit all. We cannot send, police officers with one skill set and expect them to be able to do it across every crime type. That's just folly in some respects. And it's trying to represent that in the workforce. And of course, the fact we've got a delineation between police officers and police staff is a great leveller, because we get more representation, I think, a more diverse mix in our police staff, which is really, really healthy. So the nature of our workforce is changing, and therefore I think the opportunities to be a much more open workforce, I think, is there for us. It's not all one type fits all.
I think we'd all recognise that, actually. I mean, there has been a very different change in behaviours, and behaviours which are valued by the organisation. Policing has changed very much, hasn't it? I mean, it's gone from being, basically banging up horrible people to making people feel safe. It's a different skill set.
We need to do both
together.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's actually quite difficult. That's why you need the right blend, and while you're always going to have these challenges. I mean, I'm just feeling uncomfortable that the style of my questioning makes me feel that you're all bad, but I do recognise that's not the case. I mean, from your perspective, Sam, I mean, I've suggested that the Met's an outlier. You can see more.
Yeah, no, listen, it's a really easy position for me to take, because I've never worked in the Met.
Yeah.
And I probably, Stuart and I met when we really started, didn't we, early in our service, and I think it's brilliant to see people like Stuart leading the Met, So that being said, I've sat in Northern Forces looking at the Met, knowing it's the biggest one. and knowing that the Met, you know, is so enormous and so representative of policing that what happens in the Met often can then ripple its way through the rest of policing. But the Met is just our biggest force. It's just another one of our 43 forces. I've come down on many occasions as a public order commander and supported the Met in many events and loved everything I've done. It is no different to working anywhere, but then, you know, it's just different policing. I've always looked at the Met and thought it's hugely complex. How on earth does the enormity of London function? But that's somebody coming from a Yorkshire force, I suspect. So you know, I'm a police officer. I've looked at the Met. They're just the biggest force. And what I would say in my current role, so I sit in a national team at the moment, I've never ever seen the Met more engaged in the work that certainly I'm leading on, which is around how, you know, the policing response to tackling violence against women and girls. You know, and that's a brilliant place to be. So I'm having a really positive experience, and I think that's a good place. And I do point to a lot of practice that's happening in the Met and you know, align our sort of activity around it and say, let's go and have a look and see if that's working. You know, because if something is working in the Met, let's use it elsewhere. So, you know, I think the Met are absolutely, you know, moving in the right place. And that's from somebody who's never worked in it, hasn't had over the years a huge amount of interaction with it, you know. But that's how I view it as a police officer.
Do you worry, both of you, do you worry that the negative press that has been levelled through things like the case review and obviously high-profile cases, do you worry that will put off victims of, you know, female victims of violence from actually making reports? And is there any evidence that that's happened?
I don't mind going first, Sam. So yeah, absolutely. I think all of us are concerned about that, which is why it's a huge part of what we're doing and how we're reforming internally and our external work. To overcome that, to rebuild that lost trust and that lost confidence from certainly some individuals, certainly many of our communities in London, and indeed, you know, many of the public at large. It is not in the place that any of us would ever have wished it to be. Can I put a figure, a scale on what it looks like? I think that's quite difficult, but professional judgment for me, and we know underreporting of domestic abuse and many sexual offences has always been there, but has been at different times got incrementally better, and then events occur anywhere. It doesn't have to be in London, and it takes a step back. So I absolutely do worry, which is why we're determined to get it resolved.
It was a particularly low point when there was the demonstration at Clapham Common. And bearing in mind who the leader of your organisation was at that time, I mean, it really compounded the offence, and I think that's been a big setback. And I think there's still a lot to be done actually in terms of convincing women that culture is no longer to be tolerated. Yeah. And so, you know, can you tell me things have changed since then?
So things have definitely changed, and the changes that we've made are already making a difference. But it's steps along the way. Are we in the place that all of us in this room, wish to be at? No, of course we're not. But are the things that we are doing, some I've described here today, starting to make that difference? They are. You know, we're seeing that increased reporting. We are seeing many more cases go through the system. Our, you know, dismissals of officers are doubling. It's not simply about dismissing officers, but these are part of the things to help rebuild that confidence, alongside the brilliant work that Sam leads with all forces around our external protecting our victims, survivors, communities, those that are at risk. Part of my job within that whole sort of ecosystem is to make sure that we are protecting from those who should not, in essence, be wearing the uniform that I'm wearing here today.
Do you know, I was sat pondering whether I should tell you the sort of thing that's going through my head, and I thought, right, I'll tell you anyway. My daughter is a new qualified teacher in London, and so we often have conversations of the role I'm doing and how she feels. And she's got no reason to have a negative and a difficult perspective on policing. But of course, the conversation's often been, you know, if something happened to you on the tube, or, you know, how would you feel about? And she said, Mum, there's no way I'd report it. Yeah.
They are.
Now, you know, you've got to have those reality checks.
Yeah.
Because if somebody who I know of that nature that's got no reason to feel that lack of confidence, what on earth is that about? And how do I fix that generically for policing? How do we give women, girls confidence that they'll be taken seriously, listened to, and we'll do our best to try and investigate, protect, and where we can. And we've lost the confidence.
We have. I'm sorry, Stuart, you've got a really difficult job.
Yeah. We've all got a difficult job.
Yeah.
We've all got one.
And we've got a lot of people who are determined to make the differences that Sam brilliantly describes there.
And in some respects, you know, we're talking about such a sexualised environment now, and you know, girls are getting younger and younger and having their you know, being victims. I mean, there isn't a single woman who hasn't been a victim of sexual assault at least once in their life, probably repeatedly, and it's happening to them younger and younger and younger. Now, if we are going to make women feel safe, it is a societal problem, but I think, I'm sorry, Stuart, you really need to own there's been a massive setback here. And partly, you know, sunlight is the best disinfectant, isn't it? You know, you can't improve unless you're actually honest about things that have got wrong. And one of the things I always, you know, I used to work as a regulator, and we always used to view, if we had a large number of complaints, that was actually a really good organisation because people felt it would make a difference. So I guess my words of encouragement would be, you're probably at that stage now, in that, you know, the more open the Met can be about what's gone wrong in the past, and the more it can demonstrate, you know, we're listening, we're acting, then the more like that confidence is to be rebuilt. But I think we're still away from there, as we've just heard very articulately from Samantha. But good luck. We'll support you. We want you to succeed.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Just a few questions to sweep up a bit. Stuart, could you just run me through what I think you said, and please do correct me if I've got this wrong, that the 21 that left you got rid of on grounds of competence, not conduct?
Yes.
Is that a cop-out?
So, no, absolutely not. So these are matters which are not conduct matters. So these are things... So this is about an individual with a whole history of things in the past. So some of those might have been conduct matters, which they might have received a written warning on at some point in the past. Some of these things could be associations with people that, because of our standards of professional behaviour, that people are not entitled to associate with. And so vetting should be an ongoing process in policing. Everybody's vetted when we join. And you know, you talked about the HMIC AFRS report at the start this afternoon. So this re-vetting process is something that we've introduced because we identified internally that we believe there were a number of individuals who we thought posed a risk. It's not simply a case that they will definitely lead through it. Some that we put this process have retained their vetting, but this is alongside our conduct process. So if an incident were to occur, we will always go down the conduct pathway because that is... It's the most appropriate, it is the best way, and with the conduct approach, if they are found at a gross misconduct hearing and dismissed, they go on the barred list. They would, through a vetting review, went to gross incompetence as well. But if they, through the conduct pathway, under the regulations, if an officer leaves policing whilst under investigation, we can put them on what we call the advisory list. So this is a list that is accessible. But if it's done through a vetting and a performance pathway, they don't go on the advisory list under the current performance regulations. And again, as I say, the Home Office dismissal review is intended to make a number of changes, as you're aware, which we absolutely welcome with open arms. The sooner they come in, the better, to assist all of us as police forces to deal with some of these.
I think Mark Rowley has been very clear on that, hasn't he? Sam, we heard from Kath earlier that the tone is set by the Chief Fire Officer, that they basically were the ones where the buck stopped, and rightly so. And you said that the tone is set by the Chief, but correct me if I got this wrong. You then went on to say, but you don't see them very much. Is that part of the challenge, that they're not visible enough?
Yeah. it's right to check me on that. I suppose I was trying to articulate that as a hierarchical organisation, day in, day out, as a routine police officer. You work a shift pattern, so invariably you don't get exposed to your chief constable, and they're one person, they can't be everywhere. So I was just trying to make that they're not in my day, they weren't as a police officer in my day-to-day life, but I absolutely felt I was working in the organisation I was with the chief constable I had. So I suppose that's the pitch I was trying to say. But I think in the bigger forces, and I've worked in both, worked in a big force, Metropolitan force, and a smaller one, and the relationship of the chief to the rest of the organisation is really, really important, and the strong and the good chiefs, I think, have very strong impact across our organisation. It is hard. I've been at the end of many, many staff surveys that say we never see the boss. Do you know? And therefore the challenge of doing the day job, getting around the teams, being visible on briefings, being at the events, you know, is a really hard one to meet, and you can end up. And actually, let's be honest about this. It's probably some of the challenges why we haven't got a diverse mix. I'm a police officer that's worked a lot of part-time hours with a family over the years, and some posts are just were never available to me as a part-time officer. So some of this is part of the issue, is actually you can't work every hour God sends and be seen by everybody. So I haven't experienced largely a disconnected chief, but I recognise that chiefs set the tone and are really at the top of the organisation. And I do understand that they can't be everywhere. And that's why having very engaged local command units, command teams is really important, and people who represent the tone that the chief is setting. So I understand the question. I've had two forces. I've had very good experiences where the chief, you feel very much you're working for that organisation. And
Stuart, back to you. So I think, and apologies, Essex Police are coming right in the frame here. And is that because they have a very good reputation? They particularly have a very good reputation for supporting women. And what I find tragic still is that I will have female victims of sexual offences say to me, well, it's okay, it may have happened in London, but I live in Essex. I'll be better off reporting it there, won't I? How can we tackle that? What is the Met doing so that when female victims of whatever the crime is go, it's okay, it happened in London, I can report it to the Met?
So I could spend another hour discussing that probably.
A few minutes.
Yeah. So I mean, clearly my role at this point in time is very much focused on the internal, but to the point of that, you know, quite simple. So I think part of building that confidence to report it in London is for us to be seen to be sorting ourselves out as the organisation, as well as in a very visible way, showing that we demonstrate and we do that. And you know, Sam mentioned it earlier about listening to victims, survivors, as these cases come in. Now, it's very difficult to publicise some of these individual engagement with some individuals, but some individuals are incredibly strong, aren't they? We've seen, not just in London, in many places, individuals who've gone through the most horrific situations step forward, stand up, sometimes waive their lifelong anonymity in some cases, sometimes not, but still come forward. And I've got to, myself, colleagues in the Met, with other forces, got to flip the coin over from a, as you described, Chair, to a, well, we're confident enough to do it even if we do live in Essex. It's not everybody. There are many individuals, both those that have been victims of police officers, both either under investigation now or indeed cases that have concluded, who do live outside of London or indeed do live in London and have come forward. But we do need to significantly improve it, as you say, and rightly so.
Thank you. And a final question, again to you, Stuart. What level of personal responsibility do you expect your officers to take for the behaviour of their colleagues? Where should that onus be?
So, I think we all have an individual and a personal responsibility to stand up for what we see where things are wrong, or to support colleagues who need supporting. I think that's it's part of changing the culture. I think there is a significant onus on those that are in influential positions, which doesn't always mean rank, but in influential positions within organisations, to build that confidence of people to take that responsibility and not to be concerned that if I do step forward, I'm going to, have whatever said against me or whatever it might be as well. So absolutely everybody has a personal responsibility. The job myself and many, many others is to help people feel confident enough to exert it.
Thank you. Can I thank both of you for your evidence this afternoon? It's been hugely appreciated. If there is anything that you feel you haven't said that you wish to put in writing, then please do feel free to write to us. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.